Welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm your friend and host, Liz Ficken, and I'm so glad you're here. Uniquely Qualified is a podcast that empowers guests to share their experience, strength, and hope in overcoming challenges in the spirit of mutual healing. We hope that you'll be feeling more aware, connected, and supported in navigating the human experience. Our guest today is John, and I'm truly honored to have him on the show. We're going to cover a lot of ground today, and so there are just a few things I want our listeners to know beforehand. First, this is going to be a two-part episode. John has lived a full life with countless experiences that fit perfectly into our model of experience, strength, and hope. And so we're going to have our first ever multi-part episode. As John himself said to me in our pre-show call, you never know how people's stories can make an impact on someone's life. And for that reason, I want to create a lot of space for John to share because I really cherish and admire the strength in his story. Second, I'm going to share some remarks about John's health and body in a way that I haven't with other guests, in a way that I hope will set the stage. John's lower and upper extremities have been paralyzed to an extent as a result of an accident. Researching for John's episode has made me more aware and informed about what it means to be an ally to people with physical disabilities, and I hope that we'll all leave here today a little bit smarter. I also want to acknowledge that this episode is an opportunity for me to check myself on some language that I didn't even realize was non-inclusive. And so I just want to remind everyone that I'm doing my best and that I'm probably going to say something that John will need to correct me on, knowing that I want to be a better community member and friend in the world. And so without much further ado, let me introduce our guest today. Originally from San Jose, California, John now lives in Graham, Washington. He has 4 adult daughters and 2 adult sons, 5 grandchildren, and another on the way. Coincidentally, he will have 4 granddaughters and 2 grandsons. Currently, John works as a clinical social worker in the physical and medicine rehabilitation unit of the hospital where he has worked for the last 17 years. Before this, John worked as a social worker for the Department of Child and Protective Services. John earned his associate's degree at a local community college, then earned his bachelor's degree at Pacific Lutheran University, and a master's degree at the University of Washington. Now for the really important facts. John will never turn down Italian or Mexican food. He enjoys sports, with football being his favorite, but he'll watch anything from basketball, baseball, tennis, NASCAR, golf, you name it. He says he's not much of a reader, but he loves watching a good movie or series. And even though he's lived in Washington for more than 30 years, he is still not a fan of the rain. 75 and sunny is the way that John likes it. John, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to chat with you and let our listeners hear about your story. And we have just so much we can learn from you.
Good. Yep. I hope so. And yeah, hopefully I'll learn more about myself.
I love that. So I'll just start with that first question that I ask every guest. How are you uniquely qualified?
Yeah, and like, I mentioned when we first spoke, I think I'm uniquely qualified because I'm the only me.
Yeah,
Um,
true.
I think everybody out there is uniquely qualified for their own life and their own experiences and choices and everything.
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of when I tell my story, people are, they say, "Oh my gosh, that's a lot. You've been through a lot, this and that." And to me, it was just my life.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think there are some things uniquely qualified to speak about or speak on. So
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And you hit the nail on the head where the whole, like me even naming the podcast Uniquely Qualified is we are uniquely qualified to tell our own stories. We are the only ones who have lived our own experiences. And so you are the only one qualified to talk about what your life has been like and all the things that you've overcome and learned. So I'm
yeah,
excited to get into it.
okay.
So let's start with California. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about your childhood growing up in San Jose?
Sure, no problem. I guess I'll start from the beginning, which was obviously my birth.
The beginning
So,
of the beginning.
yeah, so I was born actually on Christmas Day, um, 1967. So yeah, I'm old now. Um, and again in San Jose, California. My mom had just turned 19 years old when she
Mm,
had me. My
mhm,
biological dad was 31 at
mm,
the time. So, and they weren't married, so that that relationship didn't last too long. Eventually, my mom met my stepdad and got married. I had a pretty good childhood for the most part. When hear about other people's childhood, I think, oh, mine's actually not that bad.
yeah.
Um, but so I was a single child in my home for 9 years until my sister was born. But a lot of times on the weekends, I would go to my dad's house, my real dad's house, and he married a woman that had four boys. And
Mm,
so, and then my dad actually had two boys when I was born. So I got two older brothers, and then my stepdad had a daughter from a previous marriage too. So I had six brothers, or two half brothers, four step brothers, two half sisters, and one stepsister. So, but at the same time, so I'm the only child from the same mom and dad. So I had the uniqueness of growing up kind of as a single child for first 9 or 12 years, but had the experience of going to my dad's house. And one other thing, my aunt lived not too far from my dad, and she had eight kids. I would spend a lot of time over at her house too, and I was the baby, so I
mm.
always got spoiled and got away with everything. Um, but yeah, I had those great experiences of being in the house with such a huge family. And then being an only child, like I said, until my sisters were born. So anyway, I went to elementary school in a certain part of San Jose from kindergarten till fifth grade, and then moved to another spot where I actually had to switch schools for the same time, which, seems like, oh my gosh, I got to switch schools after growing up with all my friends in this one
Yeah,
school. And then, but, military kids do that all the time. So
that's true. That's
I'm
true.
like, I only had to do it once. And just to back up a little bit, my biological father and my stepfather were both bartenders uh,
Mm, mhm,
at the time growing up, and there was a lot of drinking in my family.
mhm.
So yeah, that was just kind of a big part. I remember my stepdad would every time he worked, he'd come home hammered.
Oh,
Back back
yeah.
back then, the bartenders could drink while they were working, and all the patrons actually bought them drinks. So they
Oh,
never had to pay
yeah.
for yeah, never had to pay for anything either. So
That is so different from now, where the regulatory environment would be like, no, 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 you don't get a
yeah,
drink with your drink on
yeah,
the job, bartenders.
yeah, can't do anything. So
Yeah.
my stepdad, we'd go out golfing on Sunday morning. I mean, he started me going having lessons, like when I was 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
I was golfing before golfing was popular. Um,
Wow.
but he would always drink while we were golfing. And a lot of times he would stop by the bar he worked at or another bar and go in and leave me in the car. And so
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time in the car, when he'd bring me out a Coke and a bag of potato chips. And so those, I had that part of my childhood memory.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, eventually my biological dad got a job as a mechanic, diesel mechanic for the transit system in Santa Clara County. And then eventually he got my stepdad a job there as well. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, the other uniqueness about this is my stepmom and my mom and both dads all got along. There was
Oh, great.
no there was no animosity. It was just yeah, it was great. I still have a picture of both my dads hugging. They were both drunk on Christmas Eve, hugging each other with these big smiles. But it's
Oh,
one of my favorite pictures. Um,
I
and
love that.
my stepmom, and my biological mom still talk today,
Wow.
all these years later. Both my dads have passed away now, but yeah, they're very. very unique. Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen all the time. So anyways, went to high school there. I actually didn't graduate from high school. Uh, I had a 0.8 grade point average when I left. So I just did my 4 years and moved on. We'll talk more about my schooling and how I got to where I am later.
Hmm.
I always tell people I had a 0.8 grade point average, but I had 4.0 in partying.
Yeah.
I learned that, and like I said, alcoholism was a big problem in my family. And so during high school, I drank a lot, partied a lot, did just about every drug you could think of, except
Hmm.
no needles, never did anything like that.
Oh, there we
So yeah,
go.
so I did my 4 years and then I moved on. After high school, I got a job with one of my neighbors down the street was uh, a contractor for a floor covering business. So I would
Hmm.
work with him on side jobs, and then he got me hooked up with another contractor who did carpet installation. And so he had a huge office building, did all commercial stuff, and he had me and two of my friends working for like a month, just doing demolition, tearing out carpet and everything. And he approached me towards the end and said, "Hey, do you want to keep on working for me?" I said, "I'll teach you the trade and everything else." And I said, "Well, sure, sounds great to me." He didn't offer that to my two friends, but he saw how hard I worked and I didn't mess around and I wasn't afraid of hard work. But so yeah, so that was cool. And you have positives and negatives, right, from
Hmm.
everything you do. So, my stepdad was really hard on me, but he did teach me a good work ethic. I mean,
Mm.
I was out there mowing the lawn when I was 8 years old and everything else. So
Wow.
along with, at that time I hated it, right?
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was child abuse, but as I got older, that's one of the big things that stuck with me was my work ethic and my kids will now tell you that because I had them doing the same thing.
I
So
bet.
anyway, so I did that for a long time. I was in a relationship with a girl I went to high school with for gosh, like 5 years. I was a senior in high school and she was a sophomore. So yeah, that was a pretty intense relationship. Uh, I'm gonna try and speed this along with this part, but yeah, so eventually I stopped doing the carpet installation piece. And my friend had this wild idea of joining the Navy. And I said, sure, let's go. I mean, we didn't have anything really keeping us there. We didn't have any
Uh-huh.
kids or anything. And I don't know why I said yes, because even though I grew up at the beach, going to Santa Cruz a lot, I hate the water.
Oh.
Definitely afraid of the water. My dad took me out deep sea fishing in Monterey Bay when I was, again, probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And
Mhm.
I just threw up the whole time.
Oh
It
no.
was horrible. It was
Oh man.
one of the most horrible, traumatizing experiences of my
Oh
life.
my gosh.
I was just like, thanks,
Oh.
Dad. That was a great father-son bonding experience. So yeah. So
Oh my
so
gosh.
so why I said yes to the Navy, I'll never know. But um anyway, we both went to the on the day we were supposed to leave, one of the sergeants or whoever who was checking us in had asked us if we had done any drugs or anything beforehand. And he said, just tell me now, it'll be fine. And I said, yeah, I actually partied and did some things because I knew I was leaving for a long time, wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
Uh, and my friend Rick, he lied about it, said, nope, I haven't done anything.
Oh.
So anyway, they wouldn't let me go. They said, no,
Oh.
we're not gonna. And Rick left on another plane to San Diego, probably wondering where the heck I was.
Oh my gosh.
Because he had no idea we weren't able to talk. So
Yeah.
anyway, from there, and again, I'm probably, oh gosh, 21 maybe at that time.
Hmm.
Um, so the recruitment place was in Oakland, California. So, I was taken, they gave me a ride up there. They weren't going to give me a ride back because like, oh,
Oh,
we're done with you. So I was going to take this, they got a thing called Barton in the Bay Area. And so it's like
hmm.
a train I was going to take back. So before that, I left. I was, kind of bummed out that I didn't get to go, but at the same time, looking back on it, it's like, ooh, what a relief.
Yeah.
Um, so I went down after that, went to a bar across the street, of course, sitting there
Hmm.
having a drink, and uh, on the other end of the bar was a Marine, and he was talking to another Marine sitting there, and I could hear him talking, so I went over and started talking to him and told him what happened. And he said, "Well, if you're willing, I can get you into the Marines by next week."
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, okay. So a week later, I'm leaving for the Marines, going down. So it was funny because the Marine Corps depot was on one side of the airport and the Navy one was on the other side where Rick was. So, he had no idea I was over there, but I knew he was there. So,
Oh my
um,
goodness.
yeah. Anyway, to make a long story short with that one, a mutual friend of ours had told me that Rick's back in town, like out of the Navy. I'm like, what happened? Oh, he said he hated it, couldn't stand it. He told me he was going to kill himself if they didn't let him out. And so then
Whoa.
they let him out and sent him home. So I was like, oh man, that's too bad.
Yeah.
And then I spent about a month and a half in boot camp. Boot camp's about 3 months long. So I was like halfway there. Made it through all the hard part, which was a lot of getting in shape, uh,
Yeah.
all those things. I think I gained probably 30 pounds in there. I mean, I wasn't heavy. I was a thin guy, so gained a lot of weight, but all muscle weight. So,
Hmm.
but anyway, at that time, the military and the government were doing a lot of cutbacks. So
Okay.
they brought me in and said, "Oh, we're gonna have to send you home." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because you don't have a high school diploma."
Oh
And I
man.
was and I was like, "Well, you knew that before I came in." Anyway, so yeah, so I got sent home. I was really bummed out about that. But then
Yeah.
right after I got out, the Gulf War started.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay, probably a good thing. I probably would have been dead because I was infantry. And so
Right. Oh my gosh.
again, you look back on these things and, things just kind of, you go where you're supposed to go.
Hmm.
I believe that, sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's fate, sometimes it's, God stepping in and saying, no, I got a different plan for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got back home and met up with my friend Rick again, and we just started, partying and whatnot. So eventually, my friend Rick and my other best friend Leon, who lived across the street from me, moved up to Washington. And Leon was in Seattle, and he just moved up here because that's what he does. He's been back and forth like 5 times now. And Rick moved down in Tacoma area. He had come up with a girlfriend of his. So, every time I talked to him, they would tell me, "Oh, you should come on up and visit. Come on up, it'll be great." Personally, I think they were just bored and they knew I would provide a good time. So,
Yeah.
anyway, at the same time, my brother, who's 8 years older than me. Oh, let me back up a little bit because this is a funny story. I always tell people, again, my both dads were bartenders. My mom went into labor in a bar on Christmas Eve.
Oh.
She wasn't even old enough to be in the bar, right? So I always joke around, about my past drinking. That I was screwed from the get-go. I was practically born in a bar, and I almost was.
Oh
So
my gosh. Bored
yeah.
at a bar.
So, and my two older brothers too. My dad had went back to the bar the day after I was born, just to tell everybody in the bar, "Hey, he's born. I had a boy, yay!"
Yeah.
Anyway, at the same time, he had all my brother's Christmas presents in his car, and they all got stolen.
Oh no. Oh, what
So
a bummer.
So my brothers would always joke around. All they got for Christmas was me.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh
So
man.
another interesting story with my brothers is I lost contact with my older brothers. My biological dad and stepmom and stepbrothers had all moved to Florida when I
Mm,
was 17, which,
hmm.
I had them in my life my whole life. So that was
Right.
that I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm a pretty sensitive, emotional guy, and I know at the time I was hurt and didn't like it,
Yeah.
but I didn't know how much that affected me until I got older. Um,
Yeah.
so, because I actually kind of lost contact with my dad too, whether I lost phone numbers or whatever. So anyway, I
Mm.
lost contact with both my brothers. And one day, me and my buddy were at some guys around the house that lived right around the block with me, and he sold pot. So we were over there to buy some pot, and we're sitting on the guy's couch. And these two other guys come walking out of the room with the dealer guy. And I tell my friend, I'm like, oh man. I said, that looks like my brother Jimbo, because I hadn't seen him since I was a kid. Now I'm a grown man. And
Yeah.
and then I remember saying, that can't be him. My brother's much bigger than that. Well, he was bigger because I was a kid when I saw him.
Yeah.
So I wasn't as big. And
Oh.
anyway, he was on his way out the door, and I said, Jimbo. And he turned around and looked. I said, it's me, your brother, Johnny. It was like, holy crap. And so that was just, talk about a reunion. So, of course, we just partied our asses off.
Yeah.
But anyway, I say, that was interesting, part of my life. That was great.
Hmm.
I was happy to run into him.
Yeah.
But he had children of his own that were in Idaho with their mom. And so
Mm.
he was going to drive to Idaho to get his kids and bring them back. So I told him, okay, well, I'll go with you, and you can drop me off in Seattle where my friend Leon was.
Yeah.
And so we went to Idaho. And again, just the trip there, the bonding me and my brother had, we stopped at every antique shop and you name it, we stopped there, partying all the whole way, right?
Uh-huh.
So we got to Idaho and picked up his kids, which, were all my nieces and nephews that I hadn't seen, as most of them I hadn't even ever met. So that was cool. And then sure enough, he dropped me off at Leon's house and left me there. So, and Leon always tells the joke. He said, John, you should come on up and visit. And he's like, 2 hours later, there was a knock at my door. But it was really like 2 months later. So
Yeah.
anyway, so I came up here with very little money, didn't really have a plan for anything.
Hmm.
I figured I was just going to stay and visit and then move back to California. And one of the reasons I really left California because I was like heartbroken because my girlfriend had broke up with me. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was really all my fault, right? She
Mm.
she was great. I wasn't, but I was so just devastated that, every now and then I'd still try and call her, but that wasn't, you know, that
Yeah.
wasn't good for her or me. But everywhere I went, I would be looking, oh, is she here? Or did I see
Yeah.
her? Or I'd see somebody that would ask me, are you still with her? So and so. And it really was just too hard. I had to get out of the state. That was
Yeah.
that was actually one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Anyway, I spent about a month at Leon's house. And back then we didn't have Google Maps, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything.
Mm-mm.
Um, so I met a couple of girls up when I was living with Leon, and one of them was willing to drive me to the Tacoma area in Washington to try and find my friend Rick. Um,
Uh-huh.
so I pulled off the freeway. I had a kind of general idea where he might be, but not really, right? So I stopped at a 7-Eleven, asked the guy, hey, do you know where this is and whatever. And he said, yeah, it's right down the street. So
Oh,
when I find Rick's apartment, I knock on his door and the girlfriend answers. I said, hey, Rick, is Rick here? I'm his friend from California. It's like at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, right? And he had no idea I was coming. I come in the house, he's laying on the couch sleeping. I woke him up, wake up. And he was like, I thought it was a dream, right? It was like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
what are you doing here? So
Oh
um,
my gosh.
anyway, so between the Seattle with Leon and Tacoma area with Rick, I really liked it more down in the Tacoma area. So I wind up moving down and staying with Rick. And, again, at the time and this is all piecing together, trust me. Um, at the time, right, I was running out of money. I didn't have a job. Um, and so I just started going up and down. There was like a main street there, and they had businesses everywhere, whether it be fast food, whatever. And I was just putting in applications wherever because I needed money quick. So there was a car wash. So I went to the car wash up there, and there was these two girls sitting on the wall because there weren't any cars coming through. And I'm on a bicycle. I didn't have a car. And they said, yeah, the manager or the owner's in there. So I went in, got an application. Anyway, long story short, again, I got a job there. The first day of work, I was like, wonder when payday is because I'm just about broke. The
Yeah.
first day of work, I made about $40 in tips. I'm like, holy crap, payday's every day.
Yeah, there we
So
go.
yeah, I went home, told my buddy, I said, yeah, I got $40. And of course, what do? We go buy some beer.
Yeah.
But uh, the apartment that we were at was $280 a month. That's how much
Wow.
it got. And we split that. So
Yeah.
it's like I had $140 a month. I'm like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Um, getting there, right? The two girls that were at the car wash, one of them, I had a huge crush on, and she was really this not quite a Bible thumper, but she was a born again Christian, and she had partied her whole childhood, high school, everything. And she kept saying, yeah, God was calling me through all this stuff. And again, as she looked back, she could see it. But she's
Hmm.
like, what the heck's this God stuff? You people
Yeah.
are weird and all that stuff. So anyway, I just thought, oh my gosh, this girl's amazing, blah, blah, blah. And again, we both worked at the car wash. She had another job. She was a hairstylist she'd went to school with. So she was just working there every now and then just for some extra money. I was working there full time. Anyway, I was trying to get her to date me forever. She says, I am not dating you. You're a bad boy, blah, blah, blah. But we were great. We had a lot of long talks about my life, her life, God, all these things. But she was just like, nope, not doing it. But every now and then she'd give me a ride home. We'd go get something to eat. But she was still saying no, no, no to an actual relationship, and I couldn't blame her, right? So, um, anyway, she, you know, finally got me to a point to where I was like, all right, I gotta quit. I gotta quit. And am I doing it just to get her? Maybe,
Mm.
but I think it was a little of that. I think it was a little of, I gotta stop this. I'm getting too old for this. I'm not gonna live much longer if I keep doing this. So
Mm. Hmm.
anyway, I quit drinking, quit everything, and then about 6 months after I'd quit everything, we started dating.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So anyway,
Was that tough for you to quit? It sounds like you're really like raised in a real party culture. It was a big part of who you were. You were a good time guy. Was
yeah,
that tough for you?
definitely tough. I
Big
mean,
time. Okay.
and anybody that's ever been an alcoholic knows how hard it is to quit
Yeah.
and then quit. You're quitting every day. right?
Every day.
Because
That's right.
it
Yep.
was one, that whole one day at a time thing
It's real.
is really true. And
Yep.
it was so funny because the whole God thing was like getting to me, right? Signs that were helping me along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully I don't get too emotional.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. So I figured there's another, as we go along, I know there's one part I'm gonna cry. I didn't think I'd cry at this part.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay. Our
but
listeners know people cry. Every guest cries pretty much one time. Usually, sometimes there's one with like, I didn't think I was gonna cry right now. So you are in very good company.
yeah, okay. Well,
Hmm.
that's good. There was a bar right next to the car wash. And
Yeah.
of all names, it was called Leslie's. My ex-girlfriend's name is Leslie.
Oh,
And it's
no way.
and it's just like I couldn't get away from it, you know? And she would call every now and then before, me soon to be wife, we did get married. Um, she'd call and I'd talk to her every now and then, get my hopes up. And again, I
Yeah.
didn't plan around sticking around. I planned on going back to California because who wants to stay in Washington where it rains all the time like that? My problem was is I got here in the beginning of June, so I had the whole summer,
Oh,
and the summer was beautiful. Again, we just the whole apartment complex, everybody knew each other. We just partied, went to the lakes all the time.
oh
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, so anyway, so that bar named Leslie's, I would go over there every now and then. We'd party over there. Sometimes at work, when I was on my lunch, I'd run over there, down a couple beers and go back to work. So
Mm-hmm.
one day I went over there and went to go in and the doors were locked. And I'm like,
Oh,
what the heck? Place is
yeah.
always open in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And they were closed for because they were fixing something. I don't know if it was a water leak, whatever. I don't remember. But it was just like that was a sign telling me God saying, "Ha ha, you ain't getting in here today." You know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, holy crap. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes it's stuff like that where you're like, wait, I'm trying to get into a bar in the middle of the day. Is
yeah.
this what I really should be doing right now? Is this what
Well,
I want to be doing right now?
yeah, exactly. Because, I was fighting with myself, knowing side that I was
Totally.
at that point telling myself at that point, you shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing this. And then you go and do it.
You do
And
it
then,
anyway.
then God said, no, you're
Mm-hmm.
not.
Yep, not
So,
today. Take a
yeah,
look at
but
this.
yeah, we had hours and hours of time together
Mm-hmm.
at working out the car wash because a lot of times it would rain, obviously, snow, whatever, and we weren't really working. We were just sitting around talking. So
Mm-hmm.
we never got to date, but when you work with somebody and you spend hours and hours, you can have some deep, deep conversations. And so
Yeah.
that's how I really got to know her, and she really got to know me. And she even says, down the road, she's like, I knew you were a great guy, but I wasn't going there. And she even told me one time, you need to go back to your girlfriend in San Jose. Because I told her that whole story. And
Yeah.
she said, no, I'm not gonna date you. You need to just go back. So
Mm-hmm.
um anyway, we wound up getting married. We drove down to San Jose. So she was able to meet my parents and everything for the
Mm-hmm.
first time. And we had this planned, right? So I was going down there and I had like my carpet tools, everything at my parents' house. So I was bringing those back because, couldn't work at the car wash forever. I was gonna have to get a real job again. So my goal was to go back to installing carpet. And the owner of the car wash, her son owned a carpet business. So
Oh, no way.
yeah. So I had a job automatically. So we drove to Reno and got married, and we just told everybody we're not having a big wedding. This is the day and time and where we're at. If you want to come join us, have at it. So my brother came, my one brother that I drove up here with, my sisters, my mom, dad, her mom. and a couple of her best friends all flew to Reno, had this wedding, spent a couple of days there, and then drove home. At the time, the owners of the car wash had made me the manager of the place. And again, because I worked my butt off, I made more tips than anybody there. So she made me manager, and because of that, I was salary,
Mm.
and I was the only employee there that had medical insurance. And so that plays a huge part into
Uh-huh.
the second part of this story. Uh,
Yeah.
so we got married June 9th, 1993, and then in August found out she was pregnant. And so, obviously
Wow.
that's great. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a dad.
Yeah.
How scary is that? Uh, Funny thing is though, even growing up as a kid in high school, doing everything I was doing, I knew I was going to get married. I said, I'm only getting married once. Because if
Hmm.
it doesn't work out, I'm not doing it again.
Hmm.
And I knew I wanted to be a dad.
You did.
So, but at the same time, I'm like, I can't be a dad doing this stuff.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah.
so yeah. Anyway, so we had uh won a trip to Vegas. And so we went down there um in May, a couple weeks before Memorial Day. She was 8 months pregnant.
Oh.
Her best friend had a condo there, and then my other best friend that had moved to Arizona after I moved up here, him and his wife came to Vegas and joined us, and that was great because I hadn't seen him in years. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so that's kind of all that piece of it. My
Uh-huh.
childhood for the most part. I'm sure there are things I'm leaving out and forgetting, but yeah, that's that part of it.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. Do you want to take a break here, or do you want to get into the next part of the story?
yeah, we can take a quick break if
Let's
that's
take a
okay with
break.
you.
All right, sounds good. We will take a break right now. Hey, listeners, we are back from our break, and John and I were just talking about his childhood, his early adult life, and we were talking about how he had gone to Vegas with a few friends in May of 1994. And before we move forward linearly with his story, John did just want to add a few more things from his childhood and early adulthood that he knows will help us better understand and appreciate his story as we move on. So, John, I'll hand it back to you and you can fill us in on those things.
Okay, yep, sounds good. So I just want to go back to uh this relates to the whole God thing and where I get later in life with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many moments when you figure it out at the end and you look back on your life and like, oh my gosh, God was there.
Yes.
He was there. He was there. And it's like, man. But yeah, anyway, so I mentioned the part about my dad, leaving me in the car at the bars, and my mom would call the bar all the time, and of course they would say, nope, he's not here. I haven't seen him. So
Yeah.
we only had one car, so it's not like my mom could go out searching for him. But my biological dad had quit drinking by then, and so my mom would call him and do you think you know where Mike is or whatever? And
Yeah.
so, but anyway, there was one time he left me outside in the car, well, in his truck, and I just remember it was getting dark. We were in a bad side of town. I mean, I
Mm.
grew up in a bad side of town, so but this particular area, there was a lot of shootings and stabbings and burglaries and robberies, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting dark. I'm in his truck, and there's no there's a payphone. So a lot of our listeners probably don't know what a payphone is, but way before the cell phones, obviously. But I didn't have a dime. It cost 10 cents to put it in. I had no money. I searched my dad's whole truck, couldn't find anything. And I
Mm.
remember just crying. And I guess I didn't know how to make a collect call at that time, obviously.
Oh.
Otherwise, I could have just called my mom, collect, and tell her this is where I am. Anyway, I was crying just all by myself, getting scared, getting dark. So I got out of the truck and opened the driver door, and I put my hand under my dad's seat looking for money again. Now, mind you, I had already done this and didn't find anything.
Mm-hmm.
I do it again, and there's a dime under there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So I was able to call my mom. I think my real dad came and picked me up, took me there. Again, it was like, and I tell people that story, I'm like, there was nothing. I I
Yeah.
I searched that truck, two, three times, nothing. And then
Mm-hmm.
it was like I got to the point where, and again, that is, I don't know if I was praying and asking God, help me get out of this, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously I'm positive that's what it was, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, and then when my mom had my sister, who's again 9 years younger than me, our family kind of grew up Catholic. I always identified as a Catholic. My whole family's that. A lot of huge Italian family, a lot of relatives in New York. My mom was actually born in Buffalo, New York, and my dad was born in Brooklyn. And,
Mm.
and they met in California, go figure. So yeah. Anyway, so my mom and dad wanted to get my sister baptized. So they go to the Catholic church that, we kind of all know and have been to, but it's not like we go any Sunday at all, ever. So in doing that, the priest, whoever it was, said, well, you have this other kid talking about me. Like, he's not involved in the church or anything. He didn't get baptized here. He didn't make us do the communion thing or whatever. And so, anyway, I wound up having to go to church every Sunday. And I had to put my little note in the basket, pass it around for money, so they knew I was there.
Oh,
Just
wow.
just so my sister could get baptized. Now, mind you, my mom and dad didn't have to go. And so I was like, why the heck do I have to go? I'm like,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound fair. I gotta go to church every Sunday so she can get baptized.
Yeah.
Anyway, and with that, I wound up having to go to catechism classes, which is,
Mm-hmm.
just a part of the Catholic religion that leads you to, making your first communion, and then after that, it's your confirmation. Um, so yeah, so I was like pretty pissed about that I had to do that, but in the long run, it turned out I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of nice girls here at this church. Not too bad. I had my catechism classes, same thing. I had to ride my bike, and those were always, like parents who are involved in the church that taught these classes, and
Right.
so there'd be about 6 to 10 of us. Um, and we did these on Saturday morning, right? And
Mm.
so we'd ride my bike over there. We'd have our catechism class. I remember after catechism class, there was a girl in there that I had a huge crush on. I'll never forget this. Whoever forgets their first kiss, right?
Oh.
Yeah, had her first kiss after catechism class. I think I was still sitting on my bike when we kissed.
Oh my
But,
gosh.
but yeah, so that was just so the whole God thing, right? I always believed in God. I knew he was there. I knew he was real. And again, a lot of that was before I even had to start going to the catechism classes and all that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, so again, like I said, you look back on all that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
one other quick point too. So when me and Rick, when our short military careers ended, and we
Mm-hmm.
came back to California, it was like my girlfriend had come over, the ex-girlfriend, and I had written her so many letters. I had never wrote so much in my life. But when
Oh.
you're in boot camp and you have nothing else to do, man, you got a lot of time to think. and
Yeah.
and write letters. But anyway, so he came back and he had, I guess, worked for this guy at carnivals, like, the fairs
Yeah.
and all that. So he asked me if I wanted to go with him. He was going to work for, this guy for a month and a half or whatever. I said, sure, let's go. And so where do we go? Right back to San Diego. That's where the fair was. And I'm like, huh, we just left here.
We
And
just were
and,
there.
and now we're back. And so those were just wild times too. And
Hmm.
just again, just some background on myself I wanted to mention as I thought about
Yeah.
on our break. So
I appreciate you filling us in on a few of those things. And this is a saying that it's said in 12-step rooms. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was
yeah,
there, but it's the is it odd or is it God? And when you were talking about the dime story or like any of
yeah,
these other things where it's like, what do you mean I'm getting kicked out of the Marine Corps? What do
yeah,
you mean this is happening? It's like you were saying, looking back, you can ask that question, huh, was that a coincidence or was that a part of something bigger than me
yeah,
watching out for me? So I'm
yeah,
glad you filled in some of that stuff for us.
yeah. No problem.
Are
Um,
you still Catholic?
no.
Oh, we could get to,
So,
and if that's part of your story
yeah.
later, I don't want to jump ahead, but just wondering.
It kind of leads to that because after I became a Christian,
Hmm.
I look back on, I remember asking my catechism teacher one morning, going through Bible study or whatever we were doing. Well, it's what we're supposed to be doing there, but
Hmm.
I remember asking, how come it doesn't say Catholic anywhere in the Bible?
Oh yeah,
You know,
such
and
a good question.
yeah, they just couldn't explain it to me. So, but like I said,
Hmm.
the whole family just, at least I didn't have to be an altar boy like my cousins in New York, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So, but and it's just funny you're growing up in that, but yet, you're still
Hmm.
just able to party and have a good time. So yeah, no, I'm not, and we can touch on that again also.
Sounds good. I don't know if you intended to turn your video off, but I can't see you anymore.
Oh, okay.
If you
Sorry.
don't, if you don't, no, if you don't mind turning back on, so I
Oh, no,
you.
I forgot. I just forgot to turn it on.
No, you are all good. It
All
just
right.
went off for a second,
Yeah.
and don't worry, I'll cut this little part out from our recording.
Okay. No, you should keep it. No, it's good.
Even yeah, add some flavor.
It was probably a God thing. So,
Yeah, there we go. So thank you for just filling in some of those gaps around your childhood, God, some of your experiences. Um, how do you feel about coming back to May 1994 and restarting your story there?
okay. Yep. That sounds good.
Okay, so as a recap, you have a very pregnant wife. You've gone to Vegas. You've seen some of your best friends, had a great time, and then now you are back in the Tacoma area. You've come home from vacation.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, came home from that. And this was my mom's first grandchild that was on the way too.
Oh
So,
boy.
so even before that, when we found out Jenny was pregnant, and I'm sorry, I'm backing up again. See,
Oh no, please.
these things just come to mind, right? So
Yeah.
we were going down to California for Christmas. And that was kind of our plan. Every other year we'd have Christmas here with her family, and every other year, because my birthday's on Christmas and my mom's
Right.
birthday's on December 20th. So it's
Oh,
it's
okay.
nice to be with, my mom and the family
Yeah.
on on the holidays and her and my birthday. So, but we didn't want to tell her over the phone that Jenny was pregnant, right? So we had
Mhm.
this plan. I got this sweatshirt that said "World's Greatest Grandmother" on it.
Oh,
Wrapped it up, and we got there on December 20th, which was my mom's birthday. So I'm
yeah.
like, she's not gonna think of anything. Um, when
Yeah.
she's opening a present. She's like, she won't say, why am I getting a present? Because it's her birthday. And at that time, Jenny wasn't really showing, right? So we never
Mm.
told her. And it was hard when we were on the phone talking to her
Oh,
for,
I bet.
4 months, but Anyway, we get there. She opens the box and she reads it and says, "Oh, world's greatest grandma." And she didn't really even realize it at first. And then she goes, "My gosh." And she realized it, started crying.
Oh, that's
I'm
so
like, "Oh,
sweet.
yeah." I was like, "That was a good one."
You
It was
got her.
so hard not to tell her all that time. But
I
yeah.
bet.
So
Oh,
yeah.
so she
So
was
anyway,
so
so
excited.
yep. So we get back from Vegas. We're back home. You know, I'm at the car wash working one day, and this guy comes in, one of the customers, and he said, "Hey, were you in Vegas last week?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I thought that was you. I saw you at the George Carlin show," which I was there.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that is just too weird that, somebody's gonna recognize you in Vegas."
Yeah,
Um,
that's not a question you usually. I know you're clean and sober now, but it's one of those.
yeah.
Oh, what'd you see?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So anyway, so a couple weeks after we got back, it was May 29th, so it was on a Sunday, the day before Memorial Day.
Hmm.
And for weeks that we had kind of been planning a football game, me and my friends and whatnot. So growing up, again, I played football in high school, and we played every weekend at some park, anywhere. We just football junk. We would ride our bikes for miles to play these other kids on the other side of town, whatever. And
Hmm.
so me and Rick and Leon. And Leon's brothers were here, and there was a couple other guys from California that we'd met. So it was kind of like all of us guys from California versus all these guys from Washington was the plan. So we go to this junior high school. It's actually in an area called Woodbrook, right outside Lakewood, Tacoma area.
Hmm.
And we were playing at the junior high, and we're just killing them. Right. And it's like 14-5. Like every touchdown was just 1 point. It was 14 to
Mm.
5. So they had the ball. Anyway, the guy was running. Um, we were only going to 15. So we only had one more score before the game ended. Sky was running, and I ran to tackle him. I hit him, tackled him, fell to the ground myself. And, I played football for many years. I've had a lot of mild concussions, and, they call it getting your bell rung back then.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
weren't too keen on concussions like they are now, or too worried about it.
Yeah.
But, who knew I was getting them my whole childhood for
Hmm.
the most part.
Yeah.
But usually you just shake it off, your head clears, you get back up and keep playing. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, I kind of shook it off without shaking,
Yeah.
and my head cleared, and I couldn't move. I couldn't get up. I was like, and all the guys are around me, and I was telling my friend Leon, I'm like, I can't move, I can't move. And then I kept saying my neck is killing me because
Oh, yeah.
it hurt so bad. And a couple guys just tried to grab my hand, pull me up. Come on, get up. You're
Oh,
all right. Which
yeah.
just what we did back then.
Yeah.
But Leon knew enough to don't move them, don't touch them. You know,
Yeah.
it kind of turned me over on my back, held my head. Um, I mean, at this point, I start freaking out, right? I can't
Yeah.
breathe. I can't breathe. My neck is killing me. I can't move. What is going on? So, my one buddy jumped in my car and drove down the street where I live to tell Jenny, my wife, John's hurt. We gotta go. My other buddy, there was a cop sitting in the parking lot doing paperwork. So they ran over to him to call 911 because, again, nobody had a phone.
Right.
So
Yeah.
luckily he was sitting there. So he called for an ambulance. I kept asking Leon, "Are they almost here? Can you hear them?" And
Yeah.
he kept telling me yes, yes, yes. And after the fact, down the road, he said, "I didn't hear a damn thing."
Yeah. Just
I
trying to
could,
keep you calm.
yeah, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
I didn't hear no siren, no nothing.
Yeah.
And then Jenny got there at the same time, and later she's like, I just had this feeling something bad was going to happen. She told me
Mm,
this after the
really?
fact again, right? So she said she just had a feeling. She just knew. Anyway, so what had happened was I broke my neck. They said the vertebrae, my fifth vertebrae in my neck just kind of exploded. So when my head hit this guy's hip and thigh, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very hard part of your body, um,
Yeah.
it was like an accordion squeezing together, and
Mm-hmm.
the vertebrae in the middle took the brunt and just kind of broke apart.
Yeah.
And part of that vertebrae, it's like broken glass, cut through my spinal cord. And
Oh,
so that's, which caused the immediate paralysis.
okay.
And eventually you learn all this stuff, right? I'm paralyzed from the chest down, so like half of my lungs were affected, so they started
Mm-hmm.
filling up with fluid. So
Oh, wow.
when I was saying I couldn't breathe, it was all these things happening simultaneously that
Mm-hmm.
you have no clue about at the time. And
Yeah.
the fact that I kept saying I couldn't breathe, well, I could breathe, otherwise I wouldn't be talking. So,
Yeah.
um, but it was, still trying to catch my breath. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, is this where you want me to keep going on this whole story and how it pans out from this point?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So ambulance shows up. They take me and my wife in the ambulance. It was a huge military base right there where we lived. There's a army base, Fort Lewis, and an Air Force base called McCord Air Force Base. And they're
Mm-hmm.
connected, just huge. Again, the other irony, right? We live next to military bases after not being able to join the military.
Yeah.
Um, so they put me in an ambulance and they take me to the military hospital on base because that was the closest one. And
Wow.
they just needed to get me stabilized. Once again, you learn about this stuff after the fact, years later, days later, months later, whatever it is. But they have the shot medication they can give you that where if your spinal cord is just like bruised and hopefully you're only going to be temporary paralyzed or you'll be able to gain some function, this drug that they give you will stop the swelling of
Mm-hmm.
that spinal cord. So they want to get that into you as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I would guess now, and I don't know. It's a good question for myself. Why didn't they have that in you know, the ambulance, the paramedics? They should be able to give you that kind of medicine. So they did that there at Madigan Army Hospital, then transferred me over to community hospital, St. Joseph's Hospital in Tacoma, where I was in the ICU. They did surgery on me the next day. The thing with spinal cord injuries is my injury was what's called a complete injury. So my spinal cord was completely cut. So
Okay.
there's no fixing it, right? You're just
Okay.
they can fuse the vertebrae back together. So they put
Mm-hmm.
a plate and a few screws in there. And then, all right, that's it. Have a nice life, right? But 10 days after that, they send me to Good Samaritan Hospital. It's actually in Puyallup, Washington, 8 miles from my house in Graham, about 5 minutes from the Tacoma borderline. I knew the hospital wasn't too far from my house because
Mm-hmm.
they have a rehabilitation center there. It's actually pretty well known, especially on the western side of the United States. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
just because it had been there for so long, they have such a good reputation. It's the only one in the area at that time that worked with folks who have spinal cord injuries and
Mm-hmm.
other injuries at the time. So my wife's 8 months pregnant, and we had been going to Lamaze classes at St. Joe's
Oh, yeah.
before that. So
Mm-hmm.
um one day while I was still there, and again, I was in the ICU for 8 days, I think, 8, 10 days or whatnot, scared to
Mm-hmm.
death, scared to
Oh,
death.
yeah.
And they wanted to put a trach in me. So it's a tracheotomy through your throat to help you breathe. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of folks that have a higher level of injury, like, so again, mine was called a C5 6 because it was my C5 cervical disease for cervical vertebrae that exploded.
Mm-hmm.
So, if it's higher up, like your second or first vertebrae, you won't be able to breathe. You'll probably be on a ventilator your rest of your life. So
Yeah.
if you or any of the listeners remember the Christopher Reeve story, uh,
Yeah.
those Superman that got hurt. So he had severed his first, I think it was his first and second vertebrae, which
Yeah.
you know 20 years before that you wouldn't survive. You would die.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
those, they're on ventilators and whatnot. So, but my wife told him no. She said, no, you're not going to do a tracheotomy. He's still breathing. Sure, it's, you know, tiring and exhausting and challenging, but he can do it. So I
Okay.
remember one of the worst things about that whole thing was putting that J tube in my nose,
Mm,
because they had to tube feed me because I couldn't eat, couldn't swallow
yeah.
anything yet. But anyway, I had this crazy idea of we got Lamaze class tonight. We should go. And so, sure enough, they wheeled me down there on the stretcher, and
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
yeah, and she came with me. And so everybody in the Lamaze class was like, and they had kind of already heard what happened because I missed the week before.
Mhm.
Um, and they're like, oh, hi, hi, everything, and then mind you, my wife's still 8 months pregnant. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, I only lasted about 5, 10 minutes because I was just so weak and tired, and
That's a lot.
talking was exhausting. Everything was just very scary.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's going on with your body, and you don't know what you don't know, right? So
Right.
you learn all this stuff as you go. So anyway, they shipped me back upstairs where I belonged, and then yeah, so they transfer me to Good Samaritan Hospital, which is where I work now. We'll get to all that too. Uh,
Hmm.
so I'm at Good Samaritan Hospital. I got there on June 8th, and our wedding anniversary was June 9th. So
Oh,
we had our first anniversary in the hospital, right? So it was,
yeah.
horrible. And when my wife got to the football field, I'm laying there.
Mhm.
Again, at that time, I was just in tears crying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You don't need to be sorry. That's really hard.
Anyway, I remember I just kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Mm,
It was just an accident, but
yeah.
was it really? It was an accident, but I've been taught my whole life not to put your head down when you're tackling somebody. But, I was never the biggest, strongest guy, so I always had to be the toughest guy, right? So
Hmm.
I've been playing that way my whole life and never broke my neck before. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, we're, a year into our marriage. She's 8 months pregnant. And I knew from the minute that it happened that I was never gonna walk again.
Yeah.
I just knew. I don't know
Yeah.
how. Again, was it God telling me? I don't know. Um,
Right.
but anyway, so I just kept saying I was sorry, uh, because I knew what it meant for her, right?
Yeah.
She's gonna have to
Yeah.
have this baby, and then she's got me to deal with, and we had no idea what that looked like at all, until I got into rehab and started going through the process. Um,
Hmm.
but I just remember thinking, I was supposed to take care of them.
Yeah.
She's not supposed to take care of me. Um,
Hmm.
I always tell people after the fact when I got home from rehab, I always, tell people, and it's the truth. I'm like, she had one baby in one room crying and another in the other room crying. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so get to rehab, and at the time, me and her were living in a small two-bedroom home on her aunt's property, her aunt
Mm-hmm.
and uncle, and so we were paying like $350 rent, right?
Mm,
So it was nothing. It was one level, but not something you would call wheelchair accessible, which again, you just find out all these little things along the
yeah.
way that
Yeah.
nobody tells you know, and you wouldn't, it's not something you want to be a expert at, right?
Right.
Because that
Right.
means something bad happened. So
Hmm.
um
Yeah, I
although,
feel like, oh, sorry to interrupt you.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I feel like maybe it's more top of mind for people with construction now, but I would imagine in the early 90s it's only thinking about wheelchair accessibility for very old aging people, not a young couple having their first baby. You choosing that place to live, you would have never known, oh, we're gonna need some sort of accessible feature
Yeah.
for our
The good
family.
news was that it was one level. There
Hmm.
weren't the back door, there weren't any steps, just a little threshold. So I could get in the home, I could move around, I could barely fit into the bedroom, couldn't fit into the bathroom, but
Hmm.
yeah, kind of getting ahead of myself. So I just want to kind of go back
Oh
to
yeah, sorry, I kind of moved us
yeah,
ahead.
okay. So back to Good Samaritan Hospital, our first anniversary the next day. And one of her friends had brought a cake. She couldn't get one that said happy anniversary at the last second. I got pictures of it and it says happy day.
Happy day.
And I'm like, yeah, it's real happy day.
Yeah.
So um but at that time, I'm just so weak. I haven't eaten. I lost like 35 pounds. I got this neck brace on.
Oh.
Scared to death. You don't know what's going on with your body. You got all these doctors and nurses coming in and
And is
you
there
know
still a lot of pain at that point, or did the surgery help with,
no, there was still a lot of pain, my neck and as the rehab went on, my shoulders and my trap muscles, were sore because they were doing all the work. So, I'll just kind of give a little education on spinal cord injuries.
yes, please, that would be
Yeah.
great. I think
Okay.
we'd all benefit from knowing more about this. I feel like for a lot of us, the Christopher Reeves
Yeah.
accident is one where I remember that happening
Mhm.
and just not having any other awareness of, oh yeah, this kind of injury happens to people and they survive it. For what it's worth, my great grandpa was thrown from a horse and it killed him. He was in his
Yeah.
80s trying to break a horse. He was an old
Yeah.
cowboy in Montana. I just thought you didn't survive that kind of thing. So I would, anything you can share and help educate me, educate our listeners would be great.
Yeah. And when you're 80, right, your bones are more a lot more fragile.
Yeah,
And,
he had no
yeah,
business being on that horse, but you didn't tell that man what to do.
yeah, it was, and we have, there's patients in there that are 80 years old and get paralyzed, and
Mm,
we talk about, yeah, well, would you rather get paralyzed at 80 or 26? When I was
that's right.
26
Yeah.
years old when I got hurt. And I'm like, I would
Hmm.
take 80 because
Yeah.
you got to live your whole life for the most part. Most men don't live to be 80 anyway. So,
Right. Right.
my stepdad died at 69, my real dad died at 83. So
Hmm.
you just never know. So
That's right.
anyway, so just with the spinal cord injuries and paralysis, people see you in a wheelchair and they just think you can't walk.
Mm,
And a lot of times they think you've been in the wheelchair since you were born, like you were born
mm-hmm.
with something. They don't,
Hmm.
and I think that's the majority from what I've learned through the years. It's not so much now, but in the early mid 90s and all that, that's kind of how it was. And I remember working at the car wash and we had this guy in a wheelchair come in all the time. And again, right, you flash back to all these memories.
Yeah.
And I remember, backing up his car for him, holding the door open for him so he can get in, even though he could do it all by himself. And
Hmm.
again, you learn later, that offends some people, and other people would be like, yeah, please help. Take all
Sure.
take all the help I
Yeah.
can get. But
Yeah.
anyway, at the time I knew, like I said, when I got hurt, I knew I wouldn't walk again. what I didn't know is that my arms and hands would be affected. And
Mm-hmm.
I just had no clue. And again, it's because, you're not an expert. You didn't study spinal cord injuries anywhere. So basically what happens is, your spinal cord is the nerve that tells your brain everything, like, tells it you want to walk, or you got an
Mm-hmm.
itch, and all these things. So I was paralyzed from the chest, probably like the nipple line down.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, because I had a complete injury, I couldn't feel or move anything, right?
Mm.
So when I mentioned earlier about an incomplete injury, so maybe that's somebody that again, their spinal cord was just partially damaged, or it wasn't even cut but bruised.
Mm-hmm.
And these could be from accidents. They could be from uh, tumors, um, a lot of different diseases and things that you never even think about could paralyze somebody. Um,
Yeah.
and so a lot of the folks that have non-complete injuries, and again, it's going to be different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they got injured the exact same way with the exact same injury, something's going to be different. Like,
Yeah.
somebody could be able to feel some kind of sensation in their legs, but not full sensation. And they
Mm-hmm.
may be able to lift one leg up, but nothing else. So,
Mm-hmm.
they're never gonna be back to 100% normal.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Leon and Jenny were at the hospital when I think I was in surgery, and they told me after the fact, they're sitting in this lobby waiting area, and Leon was telling my wife about this football player that got injured, and he played Dennis Bird, played for the Jets. Um, and he had got injured. I can't remember how long it was before me, but Leon's telling her, he's walking now and whatnot, and they're fumbling through the magazine and things on the table in front of them, and
Mm-hmm.
there's the book. Dennis Bird wrote a book, and the book was sitting right there, and they're like, we were just talking about him. And so she started reading through the book, but just as an example, his injury was incomplete, and he
Mm-hmm.
he really recovered a lot, but not enough that he could ever play again.
Mm-hmm.
And he could still only stand and walk for a minimal amount of time. So even though he
Yeah.
looked like he was fully recovered, he wound up coaching high school football after that, but
Okay.
he had to have a chair out on the practice field because he would have to sit down every now and then. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
just so many variances to everybody's injury that, again, I had no clue about. So, and most other people don't either, unless they had a family member go through it. I mean, even my close friends don't know the whole picture of an injury like this or what you have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, it correct me if I'm wrong here, John, but it sounds like because it is so different from one person to the other, like you said, even if it's the exact same thing that happens, having a prognosis for somebody, I mean, it sounds like it's another situation where you just got to take it a little bit at a time and see what happens. Am I
mm,
correct on that? That it's an injury where you can't really predict the outcome. And sorry, that's like a
correct.
no duh thing to say, but
No, it's correct. Like the only thing we knew for mine specifically was because my spinal cord again was completely severed,
hmm
we could the doctors could, 100% tell me you're never going to walk again, right? And
okay.
again, jumping ahead, I'll tell you later, but everybody that I've known that has come in there with an injury, complete or incomplete,
hmm
says, I'm walking out that door. I'm going to walk again, all these
Oh
things.
yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, no, you're not.
Hmm.
And you may gain something back, but it's never gonna be like it was. And
Hmm.
probably 90% of folks that, when they first have these injuries say that. And, I always tell my family, friends, my coworkers, I'm like, am I the only person in the history of the world that had a spinal cord injury that knew he was never going to walk again from the first minute it happened? I'm like, I never said I'm going to walk again, ever. I just knew. Um,
Yeah.
but again, what I didn't know is that my hands and arms would be affected. So, again, back to the spinal cord and how it connects to your brain and, tells you to walk or reach over and grab something, or like I said, you have an itch on your leg. So I don't feel anything from the nipple line down. I can't move anything, but there's certain nerves that go to your hand, other nerves that go to different muscles. That so one nerve controls your tricep muscles, and another one your biceps, other one's your hands, and even every finger is different. So in my case, I literally cannot move a finger. So I
Mm.
can't point at you. Um,
Mm.
my triceps don't work. So if you grabbed my wrist and lifted it over my head and you let go, my whole arm would just fall,
Mm.
hit
Hmm.
me on the head or whatever. So,
Mm.
which again is like, what? I had no clue that that was gonna happen. I'm like, well,
Right.
I don't, well, I knew I wasn't gonna ever walk again, but nobody told me about this,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And again, it's just all education. So this rehabilitation center, right? They've been doing it for years. And as the years go by, they learn more and more stuff. The medical, field, doctors, scientists, whatever, they're learning as we go too. So I wind up spending 3 months in the rehab, but my buddy of mine, a friend of mine who was hurt probably 17 years before me, he spent a year there.
Mm.
And again, a lot of that has to do with what they know at the time versus what they know now.
Hmm.
Technology, all these things. But yeah, he was there for a year. We had a kind of the exact same injury. Like he's the one person I know that we literally are as close to, our ability to do things and the level of our injury than anybody else I've ever met. So
Mm.
he's just a lot older than me. So
Mm.
um
Did he become a mentor to you?
yeah, so he actually at the time he started a peer support program in the hospital for patients with spinal cord injuries. So there was a department called the Center for Independence, which is a kind of advocacy resource and referral place that was funded through the hospital. So they were kind of separate but yet connected. And
Hmm.
so my friend worked with the director there in developing this spinal cord education book and this peer support thing. So he was the first person I met that was in a wheelchair, and it was very early on. And I remember thinking, oh, his hands work.
Mm.
He's moving his arms, moving his hands. But of course, as I learned later, he can't use his hands. They're
Mm.
paralyzed just like mine. So the one thing that's not paralyzed is our wrist extension. So
Mm.
if we pull our hands back, our fingers will naturally close together.
Mm.
So again, as you get stronger and what I tell people is I never gained anything back. I just learned how to use what I had. So you learn how to
Mm.
manipulate different objects. Um,
Yeah.
and then you just get stronger and whatnot, and you figure it out. So anyway, so again, I thought his hands move. They don't. They're just like mine. Our wrist extension makes it look that way. And
Ah,
and
yeah.
so when people see me now, they think my hands move. Because if I shake my arm and like right now you can't see me, but as I'm talking, I'm using my hand gestures, so it looks like my hands move, but it's not. It's just
Yeah.
my arms.
If I didn't know this, I would have said, "Oh yeah, John talks with his hands," because I'm seeing movement. I'm seeing
Yeah,
an inflection, and now you just explain what's happening, but I would have said talking with his hands.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So a couple other things, again, just related to spinal cord injuries, right? That
Hmm.
people don't know. Um, and this one always still, I mean, even to this day, and it's been explained to me, it's like, well, how do I know I'm hungry?
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Because I don't, and but for some reason, I guess that's maybe God's mercy that, yeah, that would be too much for people to handle. Let's let them at least enjoy their food. I don't know, right? If he's the
Yeah.
one, if he's the one that made us and made all these working parts and how everything works together, that's the only way I can explain it because, I still have the ability to eat and enjoy foods and drinks and things like that. Uh,
Yeah.
you
I'm
know,
glad.
people that went through this COVID thing and can no longer taste or smell, they know.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
but again, everyone has a story and an injury, and everybody's going to be different and uniquely theirs. So mine was just what it was. So they still do different tests back then that they don't do now. But I remember they came in with this big machine and they hooked all kinds of wires up to my head and it, I explain it to people like literally put jumper cables on my toes, and this
Oh,
machine was kind of like electrocution. And
uh-huh.
so they turn it up a little. I say, "Do you feel anything?" Nope. Turn it up a little more. Do you feel anything? Nope. Wind up turning it all the way up. Didn't feel a thing. So that's kind of one of the things back then they could tell you, okay, yeah, you're completely paralyzed, you can't feel anything, this that and other, and I'm like, okay, that's good news, I guess.
Yeah.
In the long run it kind of is, and the reason for that, and again, my buddy, we always joke around that we're lucky our spinal cords were severed because we
Hmm.
have no pain from here down, and there's so many more people out there with incomplete injuries than complete injuries. And
Mm.
those folks have so much nerve pain. Again, they might be able to feel something but not move it. And I'm like, if I can't feel it, I don't need to move it. And we're just like lucky in that way because that for people with spinal cord injuries goes on forever. So um
Oh, wow. Yeah.
so again, so my injury is what's called I'm a quadriplegic. And basically quad means four. So if your four limbs are affected, your legs, your arms, hands, you're quadriplegic, whether you're complete or incomplete, right? So as long
Hmm.
if they're affected in any way, and a lot of the non complete injuries do get a lot of movement and feeling back. So, they're able to wind up doing a lot more down the road than somebody with a complete injury. But again, they have to deal with the nerve pain, whatever they have. So, I mean, you could see literally actually meet somebody that's walking but very gingerly or with a cane or a walker. They can't run. Like I said, they can't stand up for very long. That are quadriplegics because their arms and hands are still have some, uh, level of function that they can't use. So yeah, so that's you trust me, everybody and their brother comes to you when you have this kind of injury and says, "Oh, I know my friend Bill, he got an injury and he's walking today." And even when I remember when I was younger, there was this guy that walked down the street all the time, and he
Hmm.
had a halo on, and a halo is I actually haven't seen one in a long time, but there's this big giant brace they put around
Hmm.
your head and your neck so you don't move your neck in a certain way. So say somebody broke their neck, but they didn't really get paralyzed, but they want to make sure you don't get paralyzed by twisting or moving your neck or a certain way. So they put these halos on you. And I always remember as a kid getting stoned at the park, watching this guy walk by thinking, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what his story is. Right. And then
Yeah,
years later, I find out, oh, that's what that is. And
that's what that is.
my memory goes back to that guy walking down the street. So
Wow.
so one of the other big things is, you know, you don't know, and people that see you don't know is, well, how do you get in and out of the wheelchair? How do you go to the bathroom? Can you feel your, when you have to go to the bathroom, can you feel,
Mm-hmm.
anything? And you can't. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
can't anyway in my story, right? So I'll just explain my situation. But so I have right now. I have an what's called a neurogenic sorry, and a neurogenic bladder, meaning
Mm-hmm.
they were damaged and injured because neurologically, the nerves aren't getting there. I broke my
Right.
neck,
Mm-hmm.
severed the spinal cord. So we used to explain it like if you got a piece of licorice, cut it in half, you can't put it back together.
Oh,
Right? You can't, no
yeah.
matter how hard you try, it's not going back together. And
Yeah.
back then we could use the telephone as a description too, right? If you're talking to somebody on the phone and someone comes and cuts the cord, you won't be able to hear them. So
Yeah.
everything from here down just quits working. You don't feel anything. So there's different ways to go to the bathroom. That again, people have no clue of, but
Mm-hmm.
one of them is that a lot of people will do is they have to cath themselves with a catheter,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have enough hand function and ability, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have to do it like every 4 hours, every 6 hours. You have to monitor your fluids, things like that. So all paraplegics, which means only their legs were affected. They're like paralyzed from the waist down.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to self-cath. I don't have enough hand function to do that, but as I'm going through rehab, they teach you and teach my wife how to self-cath. And basically it's just a catheter going through your penis, and if you pee out a certain amount, take it out, you're done, do it again
Mm-hmm.
in 4 hours or whatever. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a saying that I learned in rehab too, that paraplegics, because they're just affected from the waist down, they have so much upper body strength that they can get themselves in and out of the wheelchair, they can climb in and out of cars, they can sit on a couch, get back in a chair, they can dress themselves, they just can't walk. And
Mm-hmm.
quadriplegics can't do any of those things. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the nurses told me one time, they say, every quadriplegic wants to be a paraplegic, and every paraplegic wants to walk.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're like,
Yeah.
quit your crying. At least you can get dressed by yourself and do this by yourself and everything else. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
so anyway, they also have what's called an indwelling catheter, which just stays in you, and your urine just drains into this bag all the time. But what that does is your bladder shrinks, and it never fills up and stretches again because it never fills up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the self-capping, it's like a balloon. Your bladder gets full, then it empties, then it gets full, then it empties. And the other education they provide for you is that will lessen your chance of an infection,
Right.
bladder infection, UTI, which stands for urinary tract infection.
Mm.
You'll hear both those terms a lot.
Yeah.
Which to me, I was like, well, I would think that would be more of a easier way to get an infection because, you got your hands down there and catheters, and it's in
Yeah.
and all these things. Like if you have other people doing it for you, so I couldn't do it by myself, but
Yeah.
they taught my wife how to do it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and she's like, "Oh heck no, with a newborn baby and this." She's like, You put," and she said, you're getting an indwelling catheter, uh, and that's that. I can't be emptying that every 4 or 6 hours."
Mm.
And so I had this operation, which is it's called a suprapubic, and it's a very simple in and out operation. So instead of the indwelling catheter just being in your penis, or if you're a female, you know, that way,
Hmm.
it's just a little hole that's on your side that an indwelling catheter stays in. So
Mm.
it's connected to mine is connected to another hose that goes down my leg, and there's a leg bag attached to my leg that no one can even see.
Mm.
You wouldn't even know. And
Mm.
again, my buddy that had been there for years and taught this peer support program and everything, I noticed one day he had a slit in his pants leg. And I'm like, "What's that for?" He's like, "Oh, that's so I can get my hand in there and empty my catheter by myself." And
Yeah.
one of the most important things for being, quote, independent, or as independent as one can be, is being able to go to the bathroom by yourself. And when
Hmm.
you have an indwelling catheter, they teach you better drink a lot of fluids, right? And the doctor explained it to me one time, and I was interested in why do they think you get, and research has shown people with indwelling catheters get more infections than people that do intermittent cathing. Um,
Hmm.
so did you have a question? Looked like you might have a question.
Oh no,
No.
sorry. I was
Okay.
just really listening.
Okay, that's right. I know it's a lot, probably maybe more than everybody needs to know, but I think
I
people
think
need
it's
to know it.
fascinating.
Yeah,
I think people want to know these things and
yeah.
might be intimidated to ask. If you
'Cause-
can't feel from the nipple line down, then how do you do these basic functions? So I
yeah.
think it's great that you're willing to educate us.
Oh yeah, no problem. So speaking of that, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because there's always students, nursing
Mm.
students, occupational therapy students, physical therapy students. And I remember the occupational therapist had a student from one of the local colleges. And right, so I'm 26 years old, and she's in college, probably 19, who knows, right? And
Hmm.
they're occupational therapists. They have all these great ideas to help people do this, that, and the other. And like I told you earlier before we got on air, I use this little typing splint to type.
Hmm.
Best thing
Yeah.
ever invented for me. They're like
Yeah.
$22 each. I've been using them for years. So,
Wow.
but anyway, so they were trying to think of different ways that I could cap myself. So
Mm.
they're making these tubes that I can put around my penis, and maybe that'll help me be able to get the catheter in. And so she brings in her student. She's like, "Are you okay if whatever her name was is able to, help you with this or learn and whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, who cares? I'm here to educate. I'm here to educate." I had no modesty anyway, but when you have this kind of injury, there's no room for it. Everybody and the brother sees every part of you, right? And
Yeah.
and everything's
Yeah.
so invasive. Um,
Yeah.
which, I mean, in the beginning, I do remember, crying about, things here and there.
Yeah.
I always tell people, I said, "Yep, I cry all night, but during the day, you'd never know it." I
Hmm.
I've had this great sense of humor, I think, forever, right? And that didn't change me. I'm the same person I was.
Yeah.
I'm just, my body's just not quite the same.
Yeah.
So I always wondered, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, these poor students." I'm like, they have no idea what they're getting into. Um, but anyway, that wasn't gonna work anyway. So because my hand, again, my fingers, I don't have enough hand function to do it. So I
Hmm.
asked my buddy about the leg bag and catheter, and so I tried it, and so I still use the same thing today. And again, we're both the same injury, but he learned how to do it a different way so many years ago. So he had this arm splint um, that you put on, and it can help you pick up little things. It's called a tenodesis splint. So
Mm,
it can make your thumb and your index finger work together so you can pick up things
mm-hmm,
like small tiny things. And so he would put that on his right hand and reach down to his catheter and be able to empty it in a commode, toilet, whatever, anywhere.
mm-hmm,
And then he'd take the brace off when he was done and, you know, put it in his backpack or have someone else put it back there or whatever. Mine, on the other hand, I used my left hand to do it. And
mm,
I don't use the splint at all. And mind you,
mm,
they had given me and made one of these splints for me when I was, going through rehab because, every quadriplegic needs one. And
mm,
so, they bought it, insurance bought it. It was like $1,000.
mm.
I never used the darn thing.
Oh,
'Cause
really?
it was more challenging to put the thing on by myself
Oh, sure.
than it was worth. And again, that was the other thing, right? They teach you how to, there's not always somebody around to put it on. So your
Mm-hmm.
teeth, you'd be amazed at how much you'll use your mouth and teeth for things and not
Yeah,
even and not even care about germs or anything else because you just got to do it. So,
yeah.
they had Velcro on the whole thing where I'd grab one end with my teeth and pull it to the other side and stick it to the Velcro and all these great things. So anyway, it did work for me. I'm able to use my thumb and empty it all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, and folks with spinal cord injuries on average probably have at least two bladder infections a year. And
Okay.
you always have to get on antibiotics for them, otherwise you can get septic.
Ooh,
And septic, most people know what that is, but basically just getting an infection that can kill you.
right.
So you want to get on antibiotics for that pretty quick. And anyway, I drank a lot of water. It was just ingrained in me in there to drink water, and especially with the indwelling catheter. And the doctor and rehab docs are called physiatrists, just in case if you're interested. But that's
Mm-hmm.
all they do. They work on people with neurological and orthopedic stuff that have these injuries. Anyway, so when the doctor said, well, if you drink enough fluids, the bacteria, how you get a bladder infection is the bacteria in your bladder goes into your kidneys. And again, that,
Mm,
then you go septic and it can kill you. So
mm.
she used the itsy bitsy spider as a reference. She said, the itsy bitsy spider story. I'm like, well, yeah, everyone knows that. She said it goes up, but when the rain came, it washed the spider out. She said, if you're drinking so much fluid, that you never give that spider a chance to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with germs and bacteria. If you drink enough, they don't have the time to get into your kidneys or whatever. I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, that makes so much sense. So I literally drink at least a gallon a day.
Yeah.
And I went 8 years without having a bladder infection, which
Wow.
is unheard of. And I would bet my money on it that that has to be the longest ever for anybody with a neurogenic bladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether they have an indwelling or they're cathing themselves. So, and that's the only thing I can attribute it to. And as
Hydration.
and as I got older and I hit like the 20, 30-year mark in the wheelchair being paralyzed,
Mm-hmm.
I knew my luck was going to start running out.
Mm,
It's right. We haven't been able to stop the aging process. So,
mm.
just like anything else, as you get older, things start not working the same or you start aching more, whatever. And so
Mm-hmm.
I also blame my work on it because
Mm.
I'm working. I don't have time to
Yeah.
drink, I don't have time to drink water and go to the bathroom all day.
Yeah.
I am just too busy. So
Mm-hmm.
I try to hydrate up in the mornings and then when I get home. But anyway, I was
Yeah.
getting to it, as I got to a certain point, I started getting a bladder infection like once, sometimes twice a year.
Hmm.
I actually haven't had one in a couple of years now, so knock on
Oh,
wood.
yeah,
I'll
congrats.
I'll
Keep that
let you
streak
know.
going.
I'll let you know if I get one after this.
Yeah, if we need to take a break to drink water, and
Yeah.
please, we
No,
want you hydrated.
I'm fine because then I'll have to take another one to go to the bathroom. So
Okay.
so anyway, so things like that, right? People don't know unless you
Mm-mm.
ask. So, and the other thing is your bowels, right? How do you
Mm-hmm.
have bowel movement? And
Mm-hmm.
so again, when you're in the hospital and going through rehab, they educate you on all this stuff. And basically, a lot of folks, patients or people with spinal cord injuries are mostly always on some stool softener or some laxative because you can't feel when you can go. You don't know. You can't say, "Hey, I need to get my clothes off." So a lot of people are incontinent of their
Mm-hmm.
bowels and bladder. So what they train you on is, again, most people are on some kinds of stool softener laxative and use some kind of enema of sorts. So most people go that route and they have to, sit on what's called a commode chair. Some of them are, you know, on wheels. Some of them aren't. Me personally, I have a shower commode chair to where I can wheel in and take a shower and do they call it a bowel program. And people with my injury, you have to have somebody do it for you, and you
Mm-hmm.
actually have to manually extract your stool from your bowel. So somebody literally goes in there with a glove in their hand and takes it out. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's just what has to be done for me to live and
Yeah.
survive. So,
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the chair 30 years now. Um, so to me it's just normal, but for some, when you're hiring a new caregiver, they're like, "Oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, I've never done anything like this before."
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, it's fine, just, you'll get used to it. And sure,
Yeah.
and they're like so nervous and freaked out. But 6 months later, a year later, not even that long really, but they're like clockwork. They don't care. I don't care. Whatever.
Yeah.
It's just what I have to do. So,
Mm-hmm.
and again, another part where again we'll get into some more of this when I talk about after rehab and what I
Yeah.
do with my life. But I've been so fortunate that my bowels, and they have you do this bowel program to avoid incontinence, right? So you're basically training your bowels to go at a certain time of day, and then you don't have to go again till the next day or two,
Mm-hmm.
3 days, whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, whatever you did before you got hurt, you try to keep that same schedule after you get hurt.
Mm.
I was the same way. I went every day like clockwork in the morning. So that's how I do it now. And I do that and shower and everything at the same time. And the majority of people with spinal cord injuries, it takes them 40 minutes to an hour to do just their bowels because they put an enema in there and they have to wait for it to work and whatnot. I did that stuff at first, and then I had a doctor, and after 5 years, I was taking so many bowel meds. Because I was constipated all the time, and I would go a week without a bowel movement, and I would
Mm-hmm.
drink. There's a joke in the rehab that when the doctor orders this stuff, just puts an order in for it, the patient goes. It's that powerful and that good.
Yeah.
You don't even have to drink it. The doctor just orders it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I drank two of those things and wasn't going. So
Wow. Yeah.
I'm like, do I have a blockage? Do I need surgery? What do I need? And I was talking, and this is after I got out of the hospital, obviously, like I said, 5 years later. I'm talking to my doctor, and she goes, "Well, if you're taking all those bowel meds for too long, they can start having the opposite effect. So instead of helping you
Oh.
go, they constipate you." And I'm like, "Well, crap. Why didn't somebody tell me that sooner?"
Yeah. But nice to have a heads up on that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, no pun intended either. So that day I quit taking every bowel med stool softener, everything, and I've never had a problem since.
Oh,
And
wow.
I just
Great.
drink a lot of liquids. I started eating more, fruits and vegetables, and I've been fine ever since. And my bowel program takes 5 minutes in there to take whatever's in there out and move on with your life. So,
Yeah.
and and again, so fortunate because most people I know are incontinent,
Mm-hmm.
especially their bowels, so many times a week or whatever. I might have that problem once or twice a year. So yeah, they just learn to train it. So anyway, so
Mm-hmm.
they educate you on all this stuff, and half of it, some of it you'll take, some of it you won't. And
Mm-hmm.
then, transferring me back then from a bed to the wheelchair. I remember there was a couple CNAs that were like 60 years old, about 4'5", and they would just come in, move you, grab you, throw you in the chair, right? And move on. So nowadays, everyone has to use a Hoyer lift. And for people who don't know what that is, it's like a picture the big manual machines that you see over a car engine, lifting the engine out of a car. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like that when you're lifting a person out of the wheelchair, turning that person, putting them in bed on a shower chair, whatever. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the way I was taught because back then they didn't have people getting back injuries and L&I and everything else. All these nurses unions, everything, they put a stop on all that. So everybody has to use a Hoyer lift now. But not me. I only got time for that. That takes like 20 minutes just to do that. So, um, but anyway, yeah. So as I moved on and started getting caregivers, I train them myself and everything. And I train them how to transfer me without a Hoyer. And a lot of them are like, you don't use a Hoyer? And even a lot of the therapists and new therapists and patients, whatever, they're like, you don't use a Hoyer? Well, how do you get up? I'm like, I just train them and teach them like I was taught and trained. Takes five
Mm.
minutes. It's all in the technique. If you do it right, you're not going to get injured. And again, I've had caregivers that are 20 years old and 100 pounds and whatever, and I'm able to teach them how. And even sometimes when they started, I'm like, oh God, she's never going to be able to transfer me. I mean, I'm like 180, 190,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, I've never had a caregiver over 30 years, which I probably went through 50 caregivers or so, who knows, but I've never had one I couldn't train properly to transfer. So,
Mm-hmm.
all these new people are envious that I can do that. So, anyway, so they're trying to teach my wife all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, now I'm going to back up a lot,
Okay.
to where my daughter was born. So, I got hurt on May 29th, got to rehab on June 8th, our first anniversary June 9th, and my daughter was born July 10th.
Mm-hmm.
So medically, I was doing so well that the doctor said yes, because my wife was having the baby at St. Joseph Hospital, where they took me when I got hurt, where we had our Lamaze classes. And so they said, yeah, you can go. My friend had been trained on transferring me. My mom had been trained. She came up here, her and my little sister, and then my mom came up for a month after I got home just to kind of help with me and the baby. But anyway, so I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to be in the middle, 2 a.m. something. They always go into labor in the middle of the night. Sure enough, 1:30, 2:30, I remember they come in. Denny calls, John, she's having a baby. She's going into labor. We're taking her to the hospital. Somebody was driving to the hospital. And then my mom and my friend Denny came to the hospital. So I had them and all the night crew trying to get me dressed, right? And the night crew doesn't know anything because all they do is wake you up and come ask you if you're awake so they can give you pills or take blood or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, sure enough, they got me up, threw me in the car, dragged me over. They put the wheelchair in the car, took me over to St. Joe's. I'm in the room with her, and I hadn't been up in a chair that long. And so we got a room full of people, friends and whatnot, my mom, her mom. So my wife had a just a mom. She never met her dad. I can go back
Mm,
to
hmm.
domestic violence stuff. But
Man, yeah.
anyway, so I'm laying there and I'm like, my neck is killing me. I still got
Mm.
this neck brace on. I am barely a month out of my injury. And I'm like, can we get this thing over with?
Yeah.
And and sure enough, she had to have an epidural. She said, ain't no way I'm not having an epidural. And that just prolongs it, right?
Uh-huh.
So I'm sitting there even longer and longer. And finally at 1:34 in the afternoon, she has the baby. And we didn't find out beforehand, a boy or a girl.
Mm-hmm.
We were both on the same agreement with that we didn't want to find out because we were like, this is a gift from God, and you're
Hmm.
not supposed to open it until he says so. You know? And the funny thing is as a kid, I never snooped for my Christmas
Mm.
presents. I never peeked, I never snooped. I wanted to be surprised. My wife was the opposite. She said she snooped and found out everything before she had it. But she was in agreement with this. So anyway, so my daughter was born and so she had the baby and everybody was like, oh. And then at that we still and then we're like, oh wait, what is it?
Yeah.
It's a girl. Oh, start doing that again. And every guy thinks they want to have a son until they have a daughter. It's just like, oh my gosh,
That's
it,
so sweet.
oh yeah, it was just the greatest. We're crying. Um, I'm holding her barely for what I can. I got somebody right next to me in case I drop her. Because, I
But you
wasn't
were able to hold her though.
yeah. I
Yeah.
tilted back and she was able to lay on my chest a little. Um, and we didn't have the whole picking a name problem back then.
Mm.
If it was a boy, it was going to be named after me. If it was a girl, it's going to be named after her. And
Mm-hmm.
her name's Genevieve. And I just
Mm.
loved the name.
It's a
And I'm
beautiful.
like, I had never in my life heard the name Genevieve until I moved to Washington. And I'm
Oh.
like, is that a Washington thing? I'm like, because her aunt was Genevieve, she had a cousin named Genevieve, and then I've heard it a few other times. I wound up getting a book that had a dog named Genevieve that I would read to my daughter, as she got
Oh.
older. Oh yeah, it was great. Anyway, so we
Oh.
named her Genevieve, just after her mom. Anyway, so it was so funny because she had the baby, and I'm laying there in total agony, and she made it look so easy, and
Oh.
I was like, that's it. I'm like, oh, yeah, every mom that's gonna be listening to this is gonna say, what do you mean?
Yeah,
But
they're gonna come for you, John.
she just she just made it look easy, and I was in so much
Wow.
pain. I'm like, all right, can I go now? I mean, I really didn't want
Yeah.
to, but I had to. So
Yeah.
they got me back to the rehab. The nurses staff was great. I had my own room. They put me in bed, and they put a sign on the door saying, "Do not disturb tired new dad." So
Oh,
that was
that's
adorable.
cute.
And
Yes,
then
that is so adorable.
and then my doctor also let me then, so she was born on a Sunday. So the doctor let me go the next day, had to take a cabulance, which, you can just get these rides. Transfer folks with disabilities all around. You have to call the night before. So I did that, took it to St. Joseph's Hospital, and I got to leave the hospital with them, go home for the day and spend it with them, and then go back to the rehab that night. So
Hmm.
that was cool, that they
Mm.
did that. And back then they also would have you do an overnight visit at home bef
Mm-hmm.
before they discharged you, just to see if you could do it. See
Oh,
if
yeah.
there was any problems. I mean, if there's something happening, you can always call 911 or whatever.
Hmm.
But at the same time, my wife had just had a baby. So she wasn't cleared to pick me up and transfer me
Oh,
for
right.
like
Yeah.
six weeks. Um,
Yeah.
so the timing it worked out fine. I got discharged on August, so paralyzed on May 29th, discharged home on August 20th.
Okay.
They don't let you do home overnights or things like that now because the insurance says, well, if you can go home and spend the night, you can go home.
Insurance.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Sure. And
so
of course it's the insurance.
the stays get shorter and the opportunity for learning and education, they get longer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So yeah, went home on August 26th and as I went home, I wind up getting, there's just so much that goes into this, and I
Mm-hmm.
could probably talk for hours on it. But again, like I said, when I worked at the car wash, I was the only one that had medical insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank God. Who knew,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so at the time, the insurance company was calling my wife saying, "Well, he's no longer working, so." We're gonna drop him from the insurance. She said, why? She's like, well, he obviously won't be able to pay the premiums to keep the insurance. And my wife said, oh, heck no, we'll find a way to pay for him. You're not
Uh-huh.
you're not dropping him. And it was like 400 and something dollars a month. I mean, it was more than my rent. So
Yeah. Wow.
I'm like, we're gonna come up with that money. But again, she was a Christian. At that time we both were. And she was like, don't worry, we'll figure it out. God will figure it out.
Yeah.
Just like the tracheotomy. I mean, so many things that she just said no to. And we did, we just went by faith on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so they're right. I was at a job. I had no income. I had insurance, but I also qualified for the state insurance because I was disabled. I met the income threshold. Well, mind you, my wife still went to work like twice a day after a couple months later. She had a salon set up in her mom's house in a room. She went to beauty school, worked at a salon, and then kept all her clientele and went to her mom's house, which was like 5 minutes from where we lived, and did hair for her customers there. And she would take my daughter with her because
Mm-hmm.
her mom was there to watch the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anyway, so as far as caregivers go, right? I mean, I had a lot of people educate you on everything, right? What will cover this? What will cover this? This is what your life is probably going to look like and everything. So I wind up getting on the state insurance and then I was talking to the social worker there and a case manager and I said, "Well, why wouldn't the state just pay my monthly premiums for my private insurance?" Because they're the first payer. And I'm like, wouldn't that just save them a ton of money? And they
Yeah.
said, yeah, but that won't have. We've never heard of that. I kid you not. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the Department of Social and Health Services saying, "How would you like us to pay your monthly premiums?" And
Wow. What?
yeah, and
How did
so
that happen?
right, and why was I the first person to ever ask that question? It just made sense to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I went, I told my social worker and the case manager that, and they were just blown away. We've never heard that happen. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's happening now. And
Yeah. Here we go.
I was gonna call and ask, or my wife was gonna call and ask, but yeah, so there it goes. So we didn't have to pay our monthly premiums. I had double coverage. And the important part about having the state insurance at that time was they would pay for so many hours of caregiving at home.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that looked like, and again, it's different for everybody, it's going to give my wife a break, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, we had talked about it and whatnot, and I'm like, okay, if we can get a caregiver in the AM in the morning hours, right? Because at night I was going to be sleeping, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
There's another story for that too, but anyway, so I had this assessment done, and they said, yeah, we'll give you 6 hours a day. Mind
Mm-hmm.
you, right at that point, I needed 24 hours. I couldn't be alone just in case something happened. But
Right.
we figured it out quick. My wife went to work real quick, and I had a phone that I could reach and use. I just made sure I didn't drink any fluid, right? So I didn't have to go to the bathroom. Um, And so anyway, that worked out. But the caregivers, there were two LPNs that worked
Mhm.
there. And again, everybody just thought I had, oh, you got a great personality. We're dealing with all this just because I was cracking jokes and very sarcastic all the time. And again, that was just me. Nobody really ever seen me cry. And I still tell people to this day, I said, that's because you cry all night.
Mm,
When nobody is around, that's when you get it out. I remember
yeah.
laying there and I was crying one time and my door was open and one of these therapists walked by and she stopped and could see I was crying. She was like, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" What
No.
do you mean what happened? I broke my neck. I'm paralyzed.
Yeah.
But they had never seen me cry. So she came in. I
Uh-huh.
was like, I was just having a moment. And,
Yeah.
and I always tell people, even now, I said I always have bad moments, never really a bad day.
Hmm.
Because there's some part in that day where you're not crying, something good
Yeah.
happens. And, again, I swear my daughter got me through it, right? Because you have this
Mm.
beautiful creation and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's just amazing, right? That kind of whatever gets you through things, right? Mine was God letting me have that daughter when I did,
Hmm.
all these things. So anyway, so you go through rehab and at the time they had me while I was in rehab, they had me in a manual wheelchair. So a manual wheelchair,
Oh.
just one without a motor. And
Hmm.
we don't call them electric chairs anymore because, an electric chair is somebody
Oh.
getting killed and on the death row. Um, so we refer to them as power chairs now, but we still get people even that work in the industry calling them electric chairs. So they had me in a manual chair, but my hands didn't work. So they put these little knob things on each rim that kind of stick out about 2 inches so I could
Hmm.
push those and get the chair to go. But mind you, it was so hard, and my neck and my shoulders, it just killed me. But
Yeah.
I could get through there. But in the hospital, every room is wheelchair accessible. Every door is wide enough to get through. It's fake. It's not the real world, right? They have me in this manual chair, but it's never going to be realistic when I get out of here. So yeah, before I leave, they put me in a power chair, knowing that I could operate one, but it still takes some practice. I tell
Hmm.
people the first time I got in one, I went to go in the physical therapy gym. I smashed into the door threshold, and
Oh.
the arm of the that has the controls on it went flying backwards.
Oh
And
no.
fortunately, it didn't hit anything, and there was enough therapists there to catch it. I'm like, oh, that couldn't have been too bad, or
Yeah.
it could have been a lot worse. So
Yeah.
the other thing with spinal cord injuries is we have low blood pressure and like sitting up or standing up will definitely cause your blood pressure to drop. So they'd have these what's called the standing table in occupational therapy. And it's like a little crank, right? Almost like the Hoyer lift. They put it under your butt and around you, and then they use this hydraulic crank to stand you up. And they got things in front of you to block your knee, brace your knees and your legs. And so the first time they put me in it, I lasted like a minute, no problem. And then I could feel my blood pressure dropping. I'm like, okay, I got to sit down. And so just sitting me down relieved it. The
Mm.
second time I tried it, I lasted about 5 seconds. Like, nope, can't do it. Put me down. Um,
Yeah.
and they have all these other things to help with blood pressure, like TED hose, which are just like real tight socks that help control your blood pressure. And some people wear what's called a binder, just a Velcro thing that goes around your stomach and your back. I mean, almost like the braces or things you see people that when they work out in gyms, they have these things
Yeah.
on, almost something like that. So again,
Hmm.
very lucky. I never had to wear any of those. Don't have never wore a binder, the tattoo. I mean, I think I did in the very, very beginning. But again, my wife was like, I'm tired of put these on. you're fine. And if I was fine, I was fine, and I was.
Right,
No,
right.
so I did. And drinking a lot of water helps with your blood pressure as well, helps with your bowel movements, everything. My advice to everybody is drink a ton of water. That's my medical advice for everybody,
Yeah.
whether you have an injury or not. So
Yeah.
anyway, there was these two LPNs that worked at the hospital on the evening shift from like 3:30 to 11. And I talked both of them in to working for me, to being
Mm.
like my in-home caregiver. They kept their jobs at the hospital. I've been hurt 30 years. One of them's still there.
Oh,
And
wow.
so anyway, I talked both of them into the minute I got out, they got signed up with the state to get paid through the state. And I would have them come in the morning, get me dressed, do my shower, do all the heavy lifting stuff, get me in my power chair, and then they would go home. And
Mm.
then my wife would do the rest. And again, early on, I couldn't feed myself. That was probably the most annoying thing ever because
Yeah.
people are either feeding you too fast, too slow, too big a bite, not a big a bite, not enough, yada yada yada,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And so that when I was able to finally get enough strength in my arms, just again from all the use and getting stronger and learning how to manipulate what you can, I was able to use a adaptive fork and spoon that I could eat finally. So that was a big thing. So all these things, right? Nobody knows how to
Yeah.
do how to do these things. And everybody, like again, my buddy that I told you empties his leg bag with that brace. He also
Hmm.
uses his brace to eat with, to hold a spoon and fork.
Hmm.
I don't do that. I buy them. They're like a cuff thing, just like my typing splint, go around my hand and helps me eat. So
Mm-hmm.
um, so anyway, so I finally, I go home, I got caregivers. My mom's there for a month with my sister. So that was a huge help. And, it was no kidding about one baby in one room crying and one in the other room crying, right? Um,
Hmm.
but again, my daughter, was a huge, huge blessing.
Hmm.
Um, but everybody and their brother, mother, everybody at that hospital said, "Don't worry, it'll get better. It'll get better. It'll get better." And
Hmm.
they were right. It definitely got better. But what they didn't know, because again, it's never happened to them, is it gets a lot worse before it gets better.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and that's because you go home. You don't have a call button to call a nurse. There's not 30 people around to help you at every given time, right? My wife's not going to run and tend to my every need because she's pissed, right?
Mm.
I mean, you just, you can't help but, have arguments and be frustrated and angry and sad and all these
Yeah.
things about the whole situation. And you go home and that's when reality kind of slaps you in the face because you
Yeah.
realize, "Oh, I can't do this." Now you're back in your home environment where you used to do everything. And you sit there and you have nothing but time to remember, "I used to do that. I can't do that anymore. Or I can't do
Hmm.
this, can't do that, can't even open the door, can't take out the garbage, can't drive my car, can't, I mean, everything. You just can't do it."
Yeah.
And I kind of let people know for me, and I think for most, it's literally like a death. And
Yeah.
there's a grieving process that you have to go through.
Yeah.
You lost your body as you knew it. And,
Yeah.
so I probably cried more after I got out of the hospital than from the date of my injury till I got out of the hospital.
Yeah,
And
I would imagine there, sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind if
no,
I,
you're good.
but in terms of as you were talking about even your wife's reaction, my first thought was, oh, there's grief there too, where it's a grief of losing. I've lost my body as I knew it to be. I've lost how I imagined showing up as a first-time father.
Mhm.
All these things about how you not only just like your physical body, but all these ideas of how your life would be. And that's a lot. for the human brain to wrap its mind around. And then also your partner and your family, they're all doing they have their own grief too around what that means for them and their relationship with you and your family. So that makes sense that would be really that things would get worse before they would get better because you have to do that. I'm going to call it like a recalibrating of like what is new normal now? What is this? What is this? We don't know to figure it out day by day.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right. You just and you know, it was the same for her, right? I was supposed to have this husband that was supposed to, you know, get up in the middle of the night with the baby and help with this and that, and now she has to do everything. And
Yeah.
that took me back to the day I got hurt where I kept saying, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And that because I knew
Yeah.
that's what it was gonna be like. And so yeah, it was, you know, definitely a grieving process for her too. And you know, as a dad, as much as a blessing having my daughter born and being there, that was also because they start thinking, you know, some dads will complain about changing a dirty diaper. I'd give anything to change a dirty diaper, right?
Yeah.
Just all perspective, right?
That's
Um,
right.
you know, I could never hold her and feed her a certain way, you know, different things. But as time went by, you know, she learned how to climb up on my lap. I learned how to
Oh.
literally when she was in her crib, I would go next to the crib and I could stick my arm in there under her butt, lift her up, dump her on my lap. And mind, so she had to figure this out too. And then she knew we had it down. And then when I wanted her off my lap, I would go over to right on the couch and just flip her off onto the couch. And she would jump off the couch and take off running. So this is obviously when she gets, you know, a little older. She's not,
Yeah.
you know, she's not a newborn anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
even when she was, they'd stick a blanket in my arm to hold it up, and I'd tilt the wheelchairs can tilt up and down, do all kinds of things nowadays. So I didn't have any balance on my chest. So if I leaned forward, I couldn't get back up. Or if
Mm-hmm.
somebody pushed me a little, I'd fall forward.
Yeah.
I just didn't have that core stability. Going back to the rehab and the physical therapy, right? They would work on trying to get me to transfer myself from the wheelchair to the mat. And again, not going to happen just because of my level of injury. It just killed my shoulders. So much pain. Matter of fact, the only pain I still have today is in my right shoulder after all that. But and you know, in the physical therapy, the mats go up and down perfectly level. You know, it's on a hard surface. It's not a soft mattress you're transferring to. So, you know, again, you know, rehab goals versus reality
Mm-hmm.
once you get out of there. So, but yeah, so we wind up, you know, we knew we couldn't live there forever. I couldn't get into the bathroom. So how I would shower is I had a tub shower bench in there. My caregiver would lift under my shoulders, under my arms. My wife would get under my knees. They would literally carry me from the bedroom into the bathroom and set me on that thing and put a chest belt around me. And then my caregiver would shower me and do my bowel programs. And that's kind of how that
Yeah.
part went.
Mm-hmm.
So we needed to move, right? And again, this the whole God thing comes in, and this might have been the most challenging time we had gone through. So we were looking for a house. We couldn't afford anything. I finally got on Social Security. And
Mm-hmm.
at that time, well, still even this time, and again, right? People don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either be on SSDI, which is called Social Security Disability Income, or there's SSI, which is called Social Supplemental Income. And basically, the only difference is you can get on the disability income if you have paid into the system enough work credit wise over the years. So basically, you've had to have paid in enough taxes to qualify for that one.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is that's more money and you can qualify for Medicare. If you just get SSI, which means, you know, you get a lot of people that just haven't worked or they're too young that they haven't put in enough time that they only qualify for that. So it's less money, and you don't get on Medicare, you just stay on the Medicaid, the state insurance. So 28 years old, I was on Social Security and Medicare, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
again, who knew? Yeah, I thought you had to be
Yeah.
65 and older.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
And but so again, I was triple covered then. I had my
Mm.
private insurance, I had Medicare, and I had Medicaid. And what happened when I got on Medicare? The Medicaid start paid my Medicare premiums too. So Medicaid wound up having to pay hardly anything, um, because I had worked enough to qualify for these programs. I mean, covering my premiums was nothing compared to all the surgery, all the care, the wheelchair purchases and repair and medical supplies and just all those things. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to just see if I'm forgetting anything that I wanted to talk on. I don't know. Do you have any questions?
Not to take us too far back, but you
Okay.
mentioned when you first went in, you had a J tube, and then you
Yeah.
were talking about how you do have the sensation of being like recognizing hunger, and then
Yeah.
you talked about your adaptive fork and utensils to feed
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Is that common for spinal cord injuries where you need to be, I know intubate, is it intubated when the J tube goes in?
Yeah, yeah,
So and it
well,
goes
no,
down your
not
throat
necessarily intubated. That's
because
kind of
that's
when you got the trach and the breathing thing.
okay,
Yeah, it's
but
just I
it's
couldn't,
inserted.
yeah,
Yeah.
just to give you in because I couldn't eat, couldn't drink. They had to test my ability to swallow and things like that, which again is very common. More not so much now because we're more educated
Okay.
in the medical world that we know, okay, yeah, this person doesn't need a speech eval or swallow eval. We know they can swallow and eat.
So it just sounds like everything from feeding to urinating to bowel movements, it all goes back to like ground zero of what can this individual do now that they have had this
Yeah.
injury. And then everybody just has to find their own way as a part of rehabilitation to,
Yeah.
was there somatic exercising that you had to do in terms of, I'm okay, this is what hunger feels like in my body now, or is that part of the rehab where you start to relearn cues?
Yeah, that I mean that the re the eating wasn't necessarily in there. I mean they go through nutrition a lot
Mm-hmm.
for you, you
Mm-hmm.
gotta stay healthy and um so yeah, again, you're just learning things about your body and the other huge thing for uh both paraplegics and quadriplegics are pressure sores that
Mm.
can get infected. I mean, they can get I have a couple friends that I know that they literally had to spend 2 years in bed at home
Oh.
because their sores were so bad they couldn't sit on them, couldn't get up in their wheelchair. Most of the time it's on your rear end because that's what you're sitting on all the time, right? So yeah, so those are bad. And again, I don't know why me, you know, but I never had I well, I should take that back. I just got my first pressure sore last year. And
Oh, wow.
and again, I knew as I got older, my luck was going to run out on some of the stuff. But to go 30 years without one is just unheard of.
That's what I was gonna say. 30 years
Yeah.
without one, given how in my little research, it seemed like it was like number one was reduction
Yeah.
in life expectancy, and then
Yeah.
number two was you're gonna get pressure sores.
Yeah. And the pressure. And these are the things that the life expectancy is what it is because of infections, whether it be
Yeah.
pneumonia, bladder infection, sepsis, the infections from the bed sores, which a lot of
Yeah.
people wind up having to stay in the hospital and do an IV antibiotics. So, but I got
Wow.
one and I'm up in my chair. I mean, now gosh, 16 hours a day at least. And, I sit on this cushion that's about $400, $500, but,
Mm-hmm.
everyone else sits on them too, or
Mm-hmm.
they sit on different ones, but, their skin just breaks down and actually paraplegics get a lot more pressure sores and bed sore. Well, take that back. Those aren't always bed sores. Those are from transferring, from
Oh,
friction. Like, yeah,
friction.
they'll transfer and they might, maybe they're transferring to a park bench because they
Hmm.
can. They want to
Yeah.
be as normal as possible, right?
Uh,
Well, there's wood and slivers on that park bench. Yeah,
yeah.
all kinds of things. So yeah, you
Hmm.
just you just go through your body, and over the years you just, and going back to, the functional piece and your wife, there's always the intimacy question, right? And
Hmm.
this is, one thing that we've kind of developed in our spinal cord education book is sexuality, because it,
Yeah.
it was never talked about, right? Nobody,
Right.
they're just like, we don't want to touch that subject.
Mm.
That's taboo. Why would we want to touch that? Well, because it's a huge part of your life and relationship
Yeah.
and
Right.
and everything. So, people want to know, can you do this? Can you do that? Number one question, an 18-year-old will say, most people older will ask, am I ever going to walk again? 18-year-olds will go, am I ever going to get an erection again? Like, am I ever gonna have sex again? And we're like,
Right.
oh my gosh, pal, think of, that's what the young guys. Fortunately, I was 26, so that
Hmm.
wasn't the first thing on my brain. I had a daughter coming, everything else, but those questions come up. Are there?
Yeah.
What can you do for this, that, or the other? Can you have a child again, and whatnot? And there wasn't a lot of education on any of this stuff back then. And, you figure it out. You
Yeah.
you learn what you can do and learn what you can't or can't do. And, you just kind of go from there.
Hmm.
And you can have conversations with it, with obviously with your partner, hopefully, but, another interesting thing is, right, paraplegics can do all these other things, but they're not able to get an erection because of the level of their injury is down
Mm.
there. It's right in that area. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, again, things are just right. So do you want to be a paraplegic or you want to be a quad? I mean, how important is getting in a vehicle by yourself, or, being able to do that, right? And
Hmm.
you can't win either way. But at that time I was, still a young man. I was able to get an erection. I was still able to have that intimacy with my wife. But yeah,
Hmm.
the young kids, that's all they want to know.
Yeah.
I'm like, geez, pal, get the reality. But again, it's a huge topic, that,
Yeah.
it's, we have psychologists in the rehab center now that, but my friend that did the peer support and all that, he does a lot of education with that stuff. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to mention that, so I just didn't want to forget it.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and just thank you in general for your willingness to educate and be vulnerable and say, this is my experience, what it was like for me. Um, just around things that people might have the questions but never feel brave enough to ask. Or I mean,
yeah,
it's very personal. So you're
yeah,
being really open and authentic. And
yeah,
thank you very much.
yeah. No problem. It's all, like I said, I'm here to educate, and it's just reality, right? And
Right.
it's the reality none of us know unless you, like I said, unless you know. And so, like I said, even when I was working at the car wash or anything, I'd see anybody in a wheelchair. I didn't know
Yeah.
if they, I didn't know anything about bowel and bladder, and are they paralyzed? Were they born that way? Did they become paralyzed because of some infection? I never really thought about it. I think I
Mhm.
was like everybody else, where I just thought they were either injured or they were born that way. Right.
Yeah.
So, but most folks think you were born that way. So you learn a lot, especially like I remember early on going out into the community for the first few times, like in the mall and just going down the road and people staring at you or looking at you, or purposely not making eye contact with you. And, I can,
Hmm.
like, there's times in the mall where I'd be, just strolling along. Sometimes my wife and daughter were with me, sometimes they weren't. But especially the times they weren't, like there might be a mom and her child walking towards me, and the mom would
Hmm.
grab her arm, the kid's arm, and move away from me, like, let's get away, let's get out of here quick, kind of thing.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. And kids are
Mm.
great. Kids are great. They'll ask any question, right?
Yeah.
They don't care. But the parents, and again, it's just an education thing. And for me, I mean, I grew up in a very diverse community. Caucasians were the minority. Uh,
Yeah.
so I never, I didn't have any life experiences or education on, stereotypes and, just everything, no matter what it was, whether you're black, Asian, had a disability, any of those things. But I remember the first thing that hit me, as because I was older now and had some education, was, man, I said, this is probably what black folks have been dealing with their whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, they go into the
Yep.
store, all of a sudden they're being watched more closely than the white guy,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
same thing, I'd go into the store and you could just see it on the owner's face or whoever was working, like, oh my gosh, he's gonna break something. He's gonna run into something and break it, or,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow, so that, you learn a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. And when I think about like a mom pulling a kiddo away from your path, I'm thinking that's probably the parent going, please don't ask any embarrassing questions or say, that man's in a wheelchair, mommy.
yeah,
And where I grew up in Montana, it was very white. And that was, I remember seeing my first Native American. I was like, that's an Indian. And my mom was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay, like, you don't need to name it.
yeah,
We all could see.
yeah,
So it's just, I put one of those things with little kids where they're so honest and they don't know that there's something that you shouldn't say what they're
yeah.
seeing in front of them. It's just part of
Yeah,
it.
nope, I hear you. And
Hmm.
my stepdad was born in Humboldt County, Northern California.
Hmm.
He didn't see his first black person until he was 18 years old.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so as I got older, he would say things, derogatory, racist comments about,
Hmm.
Mexicans, blacks, whatever. And
Yeah.
I'm like, Dad, our whole community is Mexican.
Yeah.
Our next door neighbors who you talk to all the time are
Right.
most of the people you work with are Mexican.
Yeah.
Most of the time it would come out when he was drinking.
Sure. Yeah.
When he was sober, he had a filter. So
Hmm.
yeah, but
Hmm.
I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Hmm.
um anyway, yeah, so
Well, how about we use this as a stopping point for the first episode? And so I would love to ask you the final show questions, and
okay.
we'll focus these specifically on your accent. I think you've answered some of these questions, but so the first question is, if you could go back to right before you had your accident, what would you say to that younger version of yourself, John?
Don't go play football. Right? And I always tell people, I'm like, you get a certain age and you quit drinking milk and you start drinking beer, so your bones aren't as strong. So that's what happened. I mean, what else could I tell myself besides that? But
I
you
mean,
never know how the rest of your life is gonna go. My closest friends, even Rick and Leon that were with me that day playing football, a big group of my friends would joke around when we were partying and all that about making a bet on how long I would live because I didn't think I was that crazy, but they were all
maybe you
partying
was a
too.
little reckless.
They were all partying too, but I guess I took it to another level.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess.
yeah, apparently. And then and then I had straightened up, quit drinking, quit doing everything, became a Christian, going to church, all this stuff. And then I break my neck. And they're like, man, they're like, before this, before, he quit all that, he was asking for it.
Mm,
This should have happened to him a long time ago. So
hmm.
even in their minds, they were like questioning, they probably never talked to God in their life. And they were thinking, oh my gosh, why now? Why now?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, my answer is probably not probably, it's because I couldn't have handled it before.
Mm,
Again, timing is everything.
hmm.
You know, things happen for a reason. Some people will tell you that, well, that's a bunch of BS. People OD and die, and what was the reason for that? And I don't
Mm,
know. I don't have the reason for everything. I don't have the answer for everything, but I don't need to. I don't
yeah.
need to. It's not about me, you know. And since that injury, I've met obviously hundreds, hundreds. Even thought you never know who you're affecting
Right.
because you just never hear it, you never see it, but I know it. And so, one of the things people used to say in the hospital, a lot of patients, everyone would say is why me? Why me?
Hmm.
And I read a lot after my injury. I read why bad things happen to good people. If nobody's ever heard of that or read it, it's worth a good read. Although I
Hmm.
could only read 5 minutes before I'd cry about everything.
Yeah.
But one of the things in the book it tells you say, why not me?
Right.
Why not me? Are you saying are you gonna say, oh, I wish it was that person instead of me?
Hmm.
I'm like,
Mm,
it's pretty selfish and unchristian like, uncaring like, unhuman like, whatever.
mm, yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, why not me? And, if I can handle this and get through it, well, God must think I'm something special. I don't know. But I think he's crazy. Again, it's, you learn over the years, it's not about me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of probably like your podcast, you know. You're,
Yeah.
you're doing it for a reason, but it's not about you. So
Oh, yeah. No.
yeah.
Nope. No, it's not.
So yeah, I don't, gosh, because I thought about that question, what would I say? Maybe, it's gonna be okay, right? You're
Hmm.
gonna be
Yeah.
fine. It's gonna be hard. You're gonna have experiences that you never in your life dreamed of.
Yeah.
So, instead of thinking about all the negatives and all the things you won't be able to do and can't do, let's focus on what you will do and what you'll be able to do, right?
Hmm.
If you had a glimpse into the future,
Yeah.
people always ask if went back to that day and, you know, and this didn't happen. You chose not to play football. Would you do it? And my first answer is, heck yeah, I would do it. Who wants to live this way their whole life, right?
Mm,
But again, I don't know the big picture and how many lives this affected outside of me. And trust me, it was a lot. And I know just from people's conversations, they tell me stories about, oh yeah, this person had read your story and I had a couple stories in the newspaper about me and some
mm,
different college articles. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right?
yeah.
You just don't know.
You never know.
By this happening to me, I always think in my head, even if it saved one person's life, maybe they read about it, heard about it, met me, and they thought, you know what, I need to, you know, quit shooting heroin or whatever. I
Right.
I don't know, whatever. How could I take that away? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
that's my answer to that.
Yeah. Second question, what tool or resource has been most helpful in navigating this challenge?
Well, if you think of tools and resources as objects, I think of it as people, my
Hmm.
family, my kids, people I work with, the people I've met along the way, other people that have had spinal cord injuries before me and have kind of led the way. Um,
Yeah.
everything you learn, there's can be considered a tool or a resource.
Mhm.
But people would be the biggest
Yeah.
thing, believe it or not, because
Yeah.
they teach you more than, I mean, don't get me wrong. You get out there and you learn a lot about, oh wait, there's no wheelchair cut here to get on that sidewalk. I gotta ride,
Yeah.
I gotta drive in the middle of the road and,
Mm.
things like that. So, there's changes that you can make by doing certain things,
Hmm.
advocating, calling city hall and all kinds of stuff. So
I
that's what,
like that the people in your life have been the most helpful.
yeah.
That's
And
great.
my going back to my friend who's been in the chair a lot longer than me,
Yeah.
and again, it's all perspective, right? So when we call for a shuttle or a ambulance to take us somewhere,
Hmm.
sometimes it'll take 2 hours for them to get there, and you're just waiting.
Oh
Sometimes you
man.
get in one, and it's 20 minutes to your house, but because they got to pick up other people close by and drop them off, you don't get home for 2 or 3 hours.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
which, if you have to go to the bathroom, can be a huge issue,
Right.
right? But my buddy that was hurt in the 70s, he'll tell you, I'd give anything to wait 2 hours for a shuttle
I bet
because
that's
they didn't have them back then.
yeah. Yeah, to that point, there's been so much like legal reform around
Hmm.
supporting people with
Yeah,
all kinds of disabilities since the
yep,
1970s. It's been a huge change in the
yeah,
landscape. Yeah.
yep, true. Yeah.
All right, final question for part one of your episodes, John. If anyone is relating to your story, what would you say to them?
I would say, and where whoever's listening and they can relate to this, what part of the chapter in their lives or story are they in? The
Hmm.
beginning part, the middle part, 30 years later, whatnot. But generally, it's the folks that are in the beginning process. Not saying that's all. There are probably people that maybe have been in my condition for 30 years, like me, and are still pissed and mad at the world and everything else. And trust me, that happens, right? Like,
Yeah.
every person's unique, or it's going to take different ways, different tools, different people, different things to survive. So, I would say just, you know, hang in there, use the tools and strengths that you have as a human being, and lean on, family, friends, God, whatever you need, all those things, and just get through it, and I said, like I said, it's not about me, but maybe everybody I've affected in a positive way. There's probably some negative ones out there I've done wrong, but um,
Uh,
yeah. So
yeah.
I would say
Well,
hang hang
in
in
part
there.
yeah, hang in there. I was gonna say in part two, we're gonna hear more about your work and all the people that you've been able to help because of your work. So that's what we'll pick off next time. John, I know we're gonna keep recording here in a little bit, but just to sign off, thank you again for being on the podcast and sharing your story with us. Listeners, again, this is part one of a part two series. Thank you for tuning in. If you don't already, please follow Uniquely Qualified on Spotify, and we're on Instagram as Uniquely Qualified Pod. Please follow us there as well. Stay tuned for part two of John's story next week. And remember, we are all uniquely qualified.